James Monroe slammed the phone down with a curse and headed straight for the fridge. Wrenching open the door, he stared at the ice-cold beer. His face contorted with anger. "Fuck it," he said, slamming closed the door and marching back into the living room. He stood in the middle of the room, his hands clenching and unclenching, with the need to lash out, to break something, anything. He stood that way for some time, his eyes closed, just breathing, until the anger passed and a great weariness fell over him, causing his legs to buckle, spilling him into a nearby chair. One beer, he thought, licking his dry lips. He'd do anything just for one goddamn beer. Yet he knew he couldn't do it. He had responsibilities. He had signed on with the NHS ambulance service at 8 o'clock that very morning, informing them that he was available as a first responder for the next 24 hours for Mavaghazi and the surrounding areas. A decision that he was now starting to regret. Talking to Marcia always left him feeling this way. Lonely, hollowed out, in dire need of a drink. God damn her. She had been nothing but a pain in his ass for the 10 years they'd been married, and would probably continue to be so for another 10 years to come. If it weren't for the kids, he would completely cut her loose. The divorce had been hard enough on the kids already. The mother using them like some kind of weapon. No, hostages. To be dragged out like bargaining chips for her ever-increasing demands. Just then the phone let out a shrill shriek, causing him to start from his chair. Angrily, he crossed the room and grabbed it up in mid-ring. "James Monroe," he answered, twisting the cord between his fingers. "Hello, James? This is Jane." There was no need for pleasantries or last names. James had been an emergency responder for over 15 years. He knew every dispatcher by name, if not by voice alone. "Hello, Jane," he responded. "What's your emergency?" For a second, there was silence. Then Jane began to babble. "I'm sorry, James," she said hurriedly, "but I need your help. There's been some kind of explosion at St. Ausley's Brewery. All available units have been dispatched to the scene. Half the town is on fire. Then I get this call—" Slow down, he said. "Take a breath. Tell me what happened." "Okay," she said, and James could almost see her pulling herself back together. "The call came in about 5 minutes ago. A woman screaming about blood, begging for help for an ambulance. Completely out of control. I just managed to get an address, then the phone went dead." "Jesus," James replied, leaning heavily against the wall. "Have the police been informed? You know we're not allowed to walk into any situation with unknown factors, or a possible crime scene. And besides, you know we only carry basic medical supplies. I have the defibrillator and oxygen, but they aren't going to be much good if someone's bleeding to death." I know, Jane replied quickly. "As for the law, Andy Clutterbuck is your local constable, has been informed and is on his way to the scene." "It's local then?" James asked. "Here in Mavaghazi?" she said. "Yes, up at the old Vendraven place," she said, sounding more frantic than ever. "James, please say that you'll help. The phones are ringing like crazy, and I'm here on my own." "Sure," James heard himself say. "Radio Clutterbuck and tell him I'm on my way." He hung up on her thank yous, but didn't move. His back pressed against the wall, his eyes tight shut. The Vendraven house. Mother of God, he prayed. Please don't let anything have happened up there again. Moments later, he was in his car. His medical bag quickly tossed in the back seat as he drove through the night-shrouded streets of Mavaghazi towards the old Vendraven place. Yes, old, James thought, as he headed up the school hill. The Vendraven house was old, all right. Built in 1836 by Lucas Vendraven, the house was both the site of suicide, multiple murders, and madness. Even the foundations of the house were stained with blood. In 1832, while the house was still under construction, 2 workers had died. One after falling from rain-soaked scaffolding, and the other crushed to death by falling masonry. That had only been the beginning. Less than a year later, Lucas Vendraven had gone insane, slaughtering his servant, his wife, and unborn child before throwing himself from a nearby cliff into the cold embrace of the waiting Atlantic. The house had lain empty for nearly 20 years until it was purchased once again by Arthur Millington, a wealthy boatmaker who had retired in Mevagissey to spend his few remaining years by the sea. He had been found dead 4 months later, hanging from a ceiling beam in what had once been Lucas Van Draven's study. After him, the Dorchester family had moved into the house in 1910 and had promptly gone missing. The house had stood empty then for nearly 60 years, cursed and shunned by all, until the Jonas family moved in. The husband had been a painter and decorator who had holidayed in Mevagissey often and had finally decided to move down from Manchester to set up shop. He had seen the old Van Draven estate up for sale for an unbelievably small price and had immediately snatched it up, laughing at local superstitions and unconcerned by stories of its grisly past. He had moved his wife and 2 children right in and had started immediate renovations on the old place. At first, everything seemed to be going okay, and the village began to relax. Until the summer of '72, when the whole family was found dead in the basement, their bodies torn and twisted, as if by some terrible force. And now, over 40 years later, another family from out of town had settled in with dreams of renovating the old place back to its former glory. James drove through the night towards the very same house, spurred on by a cry for help and blood-fueled phone call. For a moment he slowed down, his own terror almost overwhelming him, but it was too late. He had already turned onto Beach Road, the Van Draven house looming before him as he came to an abrupt halt behind Andy Clutterbuck's clapped-out old Nissan Micra. He just sat there then, head down, taking one deep breath after another, trying to get his swirling emotions under control before clambering out of the car, grabbing up his med kit, and reluctantly turning to face the Van Draven place. The Van Draven house was more than a house. It was in fact a small mansion, set a little apart from the more modern houses of Beach Road, behind crumbling stone walls. It overlooked the dark waters of the Atlantic like some broken idol, a monument to both madness and murder. James started forward, squeezing through the rusted gates, and suddenly stopped. The front door was hanging wide open. The house was almost in complete darkness except for what seemed to be a small light burning somewhere in the back of the house. Slowly, he approached the front door, taking a small torch from his jacket pocket. He clicked it on and flashed it just inside the hallway. "Clutterbuck," he hissed. "You in there?" But there was nothing. Only the sighing of the wind and the rustle of autumn leaves. Laying down his bag, he flashed the torch up and down the rotten plaster walls, looking for a light switch, but found only a square hole with some new-looking wires poking through, and guessed correctly that the new family, the Malins, he believed they were called, were having the old place rewired as part of their ongoing restorations. Slowly, he picked up his bag, trying to ignore how the light in his hand trembled, throwing long shadows as he stepped inside. It was the smell that hit him first. The smell of decay, of rotting plaster, mildew, old black mold. He wondered how anyone in their right mind would bring their children to such a place. "Hello?" he called again. But there was still nothing, only the same waiting stillness. Creeping forward, he walked down the hall until it opened up into a large marble room with winding staircase that led up to an unseen balcony on the house's second floor. To his right was a large ornate wooden door from which a dim light burned beneath. With an arm that seemed to stretch for miles, he slowly pushed open the door. The room he stepped into was a complete contrast to what he had seen in the rest of the house. Here the walls were freshly plastered, the wooden floors swept and buffed down to a mirror shine with thick new rugs as a makeshift carpet. In the corner, rolled neatly away, were 4 sleeping bags, 2 large red and blue and 2 small, one pink with unicorns and another blue with Thomas the Tank Engine. By the boarded-up window was a mini DVD player and a 2-ring camping stove. And James surmised but the family were living out of this single room while the renovations were getting underway. "Hello?" he called, unnerved by the silence. "Is anyone home? Ambulance service." He was answered by a muffled groan coming from a so far unnoticed door. The noise came again, and he hurriedly flashed his torch around until he found the door and quickly pushed through, his fear forgotten as his medical training kicked in. The room he found himself in had at one time been a sort of kitchen or preparation area, and like the other room, was in the middle of being renovated. Some of the worktops and cupboards were brand new, but the walls were still covered in rotten plaster and broken kitchen tiles. James flashed his torch around, looking for someone in distress, perhaps slumped in a darkened corner. His light flashed across the floor, and he took a sharp intake of breath. There was blood here. A long smear of it leading to a small wooden door built into the back of the room that now stood slightly ajar. As James approached, he noticed a yellow flickering that caused small shadows to dance and undulate in the doorway. "Hello?" he croaked, his mouth suddenly dry, his tongue feeling large and swollen. "Ambulance service." He was on autopilot now, his legs carrying him forward as he pushed open the door, revealing the wooden steps slick with moss and cold earth walls running with moisture. He was halfway down when the smell hit him. A harsh, coppery smell like pennies, held too long in a tight fist. And suddenly his fear, which had sat like a cold stone in the pit of his stomach, overcame him. The flesh in his arms started to crawl as the hair on the back of his neck became erect, his whole body breaking out into great knots of goose flesh. He would have turned to flee, but his will was no longer his own. As he reached the bottom of the stairs and turned the corner, Andy Clusterbuck sat naked in the middle of the room, naked and covered in blood. He was surrounded by candles that cast dancing shadows all about him. As James watched on in horror, Clusterbuck raised a large carving knife and began to carve the skin from his face. He let out a sort of groan as he ground the tip of the blade under his eye and drew the knife downward, splitting his cheek, revealing the bone beneath. He saw James and grinned through bloody teeth. "He killed them," he said, pointing at the bodies all about him. "They tried to hide it from them, but he dug it out of them using this." He raised the bloody knife. "He told me a secret before he cut his own throat. He told me that there's something buried here, something that burrows and worms itself inside and hides, but I'll find it. You can help me find it," he said, driving the knife through his cheek. We can find it together." James turned then. His paralysis broken, he fled screaming up the steps, his bladder letting go as he screeched and gibbered, stumbling and falling through the Van Draven house, which now seemed to be coming to life all around him. From the shadows, faces loomed, some laughed, others screaming. Blood-curdling shrieks of agony echoed through the broken caverns of his mind, and somewhere, far away, a baby cried and a woman screamed her denial and terror. He burst through the front door, escaping the reaching shadows, and fled, stumbling into the night. Overhead, an uncaring moon sailed over the now silent Van Draven house. Inside, mice scurried through the walls. The floorboards creaked and dust motes stirred as if moved by some unseen presence. A grandfather clock chimed softly. And the house waited, and waited, and waited. After sparkling Parmesan over the mouth-watering chicken and spinach tortellini I just made, I scraped half the dish into the sink and turned on the garbage disposal with an irritated sigh. I hated having to throw half of it away each time. The only reason I moved into this apartment was because rent was cheaper after I'd lost my job and nearly burned through my meager savings. It definitely wasn't the suffocating ambience and the sketchy neighborhood, and it most definitely wasn't the meal prep boxes left daily at my door. I only learned about those when the previous tenant visited me. Alita dropped by the very same day I moved in. After pointing out the leaky corners I should avoid, suggesting affordable roach traps, and teaching me how to lock the window with a broomstick, she mentioned the boxes. Now, I thought she was kidding, but she was dead serious. I had to prepare dinner each day, dump half in the garbage disposal, and eat the rest right away. She seemed so nonchalant about it, but I wasn't. Who was sending them? Why? What would happen if I refused? She had no solid answers. All she knew was what the previous tenant had told her, which is what they were told by the previous tenant, and so on. Origins unknown. Even the landlord had no idea this was going on, and Lita stressed that I must never tell him. She also stressed that I must never refuse. Why? She said protection, claiming that for as long as she'd lived here, the apartment was never robbed. Was she seriously insinuating that this stupid requirement protected her? She shrugged and said anything was possible. She didn't question the absurdity of it all, but she did question my reluctance. She assured me that she'd eaten from the boxes every day for the year that she lived here, and they were legit. No prank, no poison, no strings attached, just dump half in the garbage disposal and eat the rest right away. She began listing the various meals that she'd prepared, and my empty stomach growled. I hadn't had a decent meal in days. It didn't take me long before I caved. Now, after a month of delicious food, my unease was ebbed, but not my disdain. After I turned off the garbage disposal, I grabbed the remaining chicken and spinach tortellini and I plopped down onto the floor, eating my only meal today. Despite licking the plate clean, my stomach still complained, and I glared at the sink. Half a portion wasn't enough, and I was sick of wasting part of a perfectly good meal. One that I'd worked hard on, no less. I was done following these ridiculous rules. Tomorrow, I was going to eat the entire thing. And I did. For the next week, I prepared and ate the whole meal, and nothing happened. I'll admit, I was nervous the first few days, but when the world didn't collapse and the boxes kept coming, I felt pretty clever for being the first to break this ridiculous and wasteful trend. As long as food kept getting delivered right to my door, I was going to eat it. I was going to eat all of it. 8 days later, I realized my actions should have killed me. My bladder woke me up that night, and I shambled to the bathroom. After washing my hands, I made my way back to my sleeping bag, and I frowned at an unusual draft. Before I could figure out where it was coming from, a startling force knocked me to the ground. My heart leapt to my throat, and it probably would have jumped out of my mouth if there wasn't a hand smothering my scream. The stench of sweat filled my lungs as I struggled beneath a bony weight, my panicked thoughts flashing horrifying scenarios through my mind. A sharp hiss for silence pierced my ears as the cold metal of a gun pressed against my temple. And I abided. Trembling, face down on the floor, I held my breath, my eyes wide in fearful anticipation as I heard my attacker grunting and rummaging. I turned my gaze to the open window and I cursed myself for not propping the broomstick properly as I saw it lying on the floor. In no time, the intruder had shoved a filthy rag in my mouth and yanked my arm behind my back, binding them before he lashed my ankles together. Only then did he take his weight off of me and flip me over, sunken eyes wild under a mess of hair. He's definitely on something. It was frightening. His actions had no hesitation. He came here for something, and he wasn't leaving without it. The question was, what? That mystery didn't last long as he demanded to know where I hid my valuables. I stared at him in disbelief. Did he not see the squalor I was living in? I didn't even have furniture. Did he think I had cash stuffed in my frayed sleeping bag? Gold hidden in my rusty oven? Diamonds stashed behind my broken radiator? My baffled silence wasn't the answer he was looking for, and I cried out as he punched me in the face. He lifted his fist again, and I flinched, whimpering through my gag as I nodded towards my meager possessions, my wallet and my phone. He crawled over to them, and I crawled away, tears stinging my eyes as my cheek throbbed to the rhythm of a shuddering heart. I was certain $11.25 and a phone with a cracked screen wouldn't be enough to appease him. He seemed desperate enough to kill. I had to save myself before it was too late. As he tore through my wallet in frustration, I made my way to the kitchen. My eyes on the drawers. I just needed a knife to cut through these bonds, and I could make a run for it. Balancing on my knees, I bent over and I reached up with my hands, my trembling fingers searching for the handle, gripping it. I pulled, but it didn't move. It's the worst time for it to stick. I wiggled it, as I always do, but my position was less than optimal and the drawer refused to budge. After a particularly forceful yank, I lost my balance and I fell with a grunt. My terrified eyes turned towards the door as the intruder stomped in, gun aimed at me. I screamed and cowered against the cupboards, my heart slamming against my ribcage as the blood drained from my face. And then, the blood drained from his face. I followed his petrified gaze, and I screamed even louder as an unholy creature erupted from the sink. It towered over us like a giant furry centipede, pointy legs bristling from its long, inky body and spikes jutting out of its mouth. With a lurching motion, looking almost as though it was falling, it descended upon the intruder, silencing his screams with a stabbing straight through his throat. Didn't silence my screams, though. And I continued to shriek through the gag as the monster continued to stab the man, his sharp legs jabbing at him like a macabre typewriter. It was facing away, but that didn't stop the spraying blood from dotting every surface of the kitchen, including me. After a final few jabs, the monster stopped puncturing the intruder, and I watched in horror as it began sliding the mutilated body into its mouth, its legs tapping against the cracked tiles with excitement as though this was the first meal in ages. It devoured its kill the way a snake would, completely whole, and vomit fought my screams as it burned my throat. Once the last of the man disappeared, the creature gulped a few times and began spasming. For a few moments I thought it was choking and dying, but to my terrified dismay, I realized it was crushing the body within its own, as I heard bones snap and grind. Its convulsing stopped, and shock stole my screams as I watched its sharp legs retract into its blood-soaked fur. It now looked more like a giant fluffy caterpillar than a centipede, and my raspy breaths raced my pulse as I fearfully waited to see what it would do next. I stared in fraught disbelief as the monster began slithering across the floor, lapping up every last drop of blood it came across before it stretched itself to reach the counters, the walls, the ceiling. It was a lot more coordinated after eating, and that amplified my unease. Soon, only my corner was left, and it turned to me, giving me my first clear view of its face. It wasn't what I expected. I'd imagined pincers, antennae, compound eyes, but instead I saw a rounded snout, floppy ears, and deep scars where its eyes should be. I mean, in any other scenario, it might pass for cute, but right now, all it did was reboot my vocal cords as it slithered closer. My muffled screams echoed as I pressed myself against the cupboards, petrified, but it didn't seem to care as it licked up the blood around me. And when it began licking me, my heart almost stopped beating right then and there, as I was certain I was next on the menu. And then it nuzzled me. I peeked through my eyelids, gulping, and I frowned in uneasy confusion as it curled up beside me, laying its large head on my lap. Slowly I allowed my screams to stop, my tense body quivering with adrenaline. It had murdered my attacker, cleaned up the crime scene, and now it was snuggling. A knock on the door startled us as my neighbors asked if I was all right, and I gasped, afraid the monster would go after them. To my surprise, it shrank away instead, slithering towards the sink and stretching itself thin before wriggling down the drain. The door crashed open, and my neighbors ran in, the look on their faces matching mine as they saw me bound in the corner, quaking with shock, and after that, they freed me, and I found my voice. I mentioned the robber, but I gave him a happier ending as I claimed he ran away. As much as the creature terrified me, it saved my life. I didn't want to get it in trouble. Besides, who would believe me? Maybe Lita would. I decided to call her in the morning, but that left me up all night thinking, was that creature the thing that we'd been feeding all this time? Was Lita right? Was it here to protect us? Was it too weak to scare off the robber before he attacked me because I'd unintentionally starved it over a week? And despite all that, did it care for me that much that it didn't eat me? It saved my life and it snuggled? I hope that was the case. The creature didn't seem malevolent towards me, but there were still many unanswered questions and uncertainties, and I hope Lita would answer them. She couldn't. I mean, I didn't mention the monster right away, afraid that she'd be clueless and think I was insane. Instead, I asked if she knew what was protecting us, and if anything unusual slithered out of the kitchen sink. She said our daily ritual protected us, a modern version of ancient sacrifices to the gods, and then she suggested that I ask the landlord to fix my past issues. I still have no answers. Too poor to leave the apartment, not willing to tempt fate. I decided to continue dumping half the meal in the garbage disposal. If that creature was going to protect me, I'd have to stay on its good side. Next day, I carried the box to the kitchen, pinned the recipe in my fridge, began preparing a spicy salmon pizza, keeping a wary eye on the sink. As I turned to the recipe, running my fingers down the instructions, it slipped from beyond the magnet and fell to the floor. This happened every once in a while, but this time, the glossy paper disappeared beneath the fridge. Now, not willing to stick my hand under there, I grabbed a wire coat hanger, stretched it out, and began fishing. I received a medley of cereal crumbs, fossilized chicken wing, a pen cap, a used car salesman business card, 2 dead roaches, my recipe, and a strange yellowed paper. Curious, I dusted it off and read it, my eyes expanding with every word. December 11th, 2013. Dear Tenant, I moved into this apartment to care for my savior. I was a hunter, you see, and I had terminal cancer. I was reckless, and I didn't care when death would choose to take me. But Alesta cared. She protected me when I challenged a bear, appearing out of the blue and nearly dying herself. No one had ever done for me what she did, and I was moved by her selflessness. Alesta got injured and lost her eyesight. She was no longer able to hunt, and I felt responsible. I invited her to live with me. With the last of my savings, I signed up for 10 years of a meal prep program. I know I won't live that long. She may not either, but I still ask you, dear tenant, to continue honoring her. Every evening, prepare the meal and leave it in the cupboard under the sink. Then go to sleep. The next morning, if the plate is still full, do with it as you wish. If the plate is empty, don't be alarmed, just continue to honor my savior, and you'll be safe and secure as long as you live here. Dear tenant, this is all that I ask of you, fulfilling a grateful man's dying wish. Please don't mention this to anyone, especially not the landlord, but if you end up moving out, please hand this letter to the next tenant. And when the 10 years are up, on December 11th, 2023, please, my friend, consider renewing. Alesta deserves it. Thank you, and be blessed. I put the letter down, stunned. The creature truly was a protector, Alesta, brought here to be cared for by a man with little time. Callum put a lot of faith in a bunch of strangers, but I guess he didn't have a choice. He could have at least told us what we were dealing with, but maybe he didn't trust that we'd have Alesta's best interest at heart. I was surprised that we'd all followed the rules despite how cryptic it was. Well, at least until I came along. They looked at the letter again. But I'd been more inclined to abide if I'd received this. I mean, I'll never know, because one of the previous tenants misplaced it and passed on the message verbally, the request changing from person to person like a game of telephone, until we were feeding Alesta half her intended meal through the garbage disposal. That wasn't going to happen anymore. I didn't want Alesta to hide anymore either. She saved my life, and I wanted to improve hers. After preparing the spicy salmon pizza, I placed it on the kitchen floor and sat cross-legged in front of it. Working up the courage, I cleared my throat and called out her name. Alesta? A soft gurgle sounded from the drain. Alesta, dinner. Food. Yummy food. I'd never met a creature like Alesta before, and I had no idea how intelligent she was. Come out, it's okay. You don't have to eat in the drain anymore. You can live out here. With me. I held my breath as she poked her head out of the sink, her nose sniffing the air. Hey, Alesta. She gurgled again. She seemed to like hearing her name. The one her only friend had given her. Well, now she had another friend. I gestured to the pizza and smiled before I remembered she couldn't see. This pizza's all for you. I looked down with regret. Sorry I didn't feed you last week. I'll never do that again. I couldn't help but tense up as she slithered over, her long, slender body compressing into a bulbous form as she settled in front of me. This is going to take some getting used to. She smelled like rust and old lettuce. I hope she wasn't averse to baths now that she didn't have to hide anymore. Two pointy legs protruded from her fur, and they poked around blindly until they found the plate. I watched in surprise as she split the pizza and slid half over to me, and I pushed it back. No, it's all for you, like Callum wanted. As I said that, my stomach growled, and Alesta chirped in response and slid half towards me again. She picked up a slice and began nibbling, and I smiled, teary-eyed as I reached out for my own slice. For the first time ever, I was glad that I'd lost my job. But once I got a new one, neither of us would ever go hungry again. Recently, my little brother got into hunting. The woods and camping were never something I ever enjoyed. I was more of an under a pile of blankets with a book kind of guy. I wanted to support him in his new hobby, so I found myself saying that I would go with him and his wife on a weekend hunting trip. The day before we met, I felt a small cold coming on. By the time we got our camp set up and went into the woods to start hunting, I had a fever. My face flushed, the gray, rainy weather doing nothing to help it. My brother lent me a rifle, even though I'd never used one before, and I decided early on that I was not going to shoot anything. The head cold was a good excuse to do so. I was against a tree, sniffling, feeling the effects of my fever when my brother shot something. I heard his wife gasp after something big in the distance thudded to the ground, and when I looked over at them both, I realized something was very wrong. Their faces pale and in shock of what had just happened. At first I was convinced my brother accidentally shot someone. I looked off through the trees trying to see what had collapsed. Spotting a white shape through the bush, I started forward, ready to help while the other two remained frozen to the spot. I arrived first to look at what my brother had killed. To my relief, it was a deer. Pure white. Stood in awe of the beautiful coat of fur. I'd never seen a white deer before, and a pang of pain came to my chest over the fact that it was dead. Finally, my brother and his wife walked over, still pale. "What is that?" he asked in a hushed tone. I looked at him confused about the question for a few seconds. It was a deer. How could he not see that? Looking over to it, I studied it again, trying to see what he meant. When my eyes landed on the deer's face, I finally started to understand the gravity of the situation. See, I know it had antlers, but for the life of me, I can't remember what the face looked like. My memory was a blur of white. While staring right at it, my brain refused to actually see it. I took a few steps back then, scared out of my mind, and started thinking my fever was messing with my head. It doesn't make any sense, I said in a low voice between coughs. The deer in front of us was special. I mean, beyond special. My brother shot it. I looked at the wound that killed the poor thing to see pearl-shaded blood staining the wounds. My stomach twisted in regret, and I felt like I was about to sob. I turned my head away, unable to keep looking at it. "What should we do?" his wife Kathy asked in a shaking voice. "We shouldn't let the meat go to waste," my brother commented. I felt the entire forest fell still at his comment. It was as if the air itself stopped moving. It revolted me. It was terrible enough this creature was dead, and my brother wanted to disrespect it further. I knew it was natural for animals to eat each other, and logically, it would be a waste to not eat this deer. However, I just instinctively knew this creature was never meant to be eaten. It was something that existed outside of the natural order, something powerful and yet fragile enough to be killed by a single bullet. "Are you crazy?" I hissed at him. Looking down at the white shape, I shook my feverish head. "We'll let the forest take it." He reluctantly agreed. I put down the borrowed rifle and started to pick up fallen branches, my brother doing the same. Kathy gathered up wildflowers, and in a short while we covered the deer as a sign of respect. We could never take back killing it, but we could show remorse. Without a word, we left the creature behind, and with a heavy weight in our chests. When we arrived back in the camp, I was feeling so ill, I turned in the moment we got back. I bundled myself up in blankets and fell into a deep sleep, only waking to drink some water to ease my dry throat. My slight cough turned into a full-blown flu, and I was in no condition to walk out in the woods. When I woke again, it was morning, but still gray and cold. "How are you feeling?" Kathy asked me when I came out of my tent. "Awful. What's the plan?" I felt like my head was going to explode and my entire body was weak. She walked over and gave me a cup of hot tea, which was very much appreciated. "We stick around until you feel better and the weather clears up. We should get you out of these woods, but it would nearly kill you if you walked through the rain to get to the truck. Stay inside your tent, keep warm and dry. You brought some books, right?" I nodded, sipping at the tea. That sounded like a good enough plan. I hoped my fever would only last another day and we could leave. What happened the day before really was freaking me out. The forest around us felt hostile. The wind howled through the trees, and I suppressed a shudder. I took my tea back inside the tent and got wrapped up in blankets once more, but not feeling any warmer. The wind kept howling outside the tent. I prayed my flimsy tent would hold if a storm came rolling in. The rest of the day, I drifted between trying to read and sleeping. I normally never felt sick, so it was hitting me extra hard. When Kathy tried waking me up to eat some soup, I was in such a deep sleep that I didn't even stir, so she left me alone to offer it later. The next day I was feeling much better and starving from not eating much the past 2 days. I had my backpack in my tent, so I opened it to find the hidden snack I'd stashed away. I ate an entire box of oatmeal bars before getting outside of my tent. When I went outside, the rain cleared up, but everything else was still damp. Kathy was outside trying to keep the fire going. "Feeling any better?" she asked me, looking and sounding exhausted. "Yeah, a bit. I think we could leave sometime today if it doesn't start raining again," I offered. She looked between me and her tent, worried. Clearing her throat, she shook her head. "James isn't feeling well. I think he caught your cold. Let's see how he is in a few hours." I felt bad that my brother was sick, now suffering through what I just did. I'd delay us leaving, but there was nothing I could do about it. I saw that we were out of firewood and I needed to get some air, so... "Hey, I'll get us some firewood. It'll give me something to do. I'll check on him in a few hours, make sure that he's eating." Kathy gave me a grateful smile. From how bad she looked, I wondered if she'd gotten sick too. I left into the woods, trying my best to find anything that wasn't too damp to burn. I found some sticks hidden under leaves and logs that should be dry enough. I was the type to get lost easy, so I needed to stick around the camp. After I collected an armful of good enough wood, I was about ready to head back when something out of the corner of my eyes made me stop. On a bush was a few drips of shimmering liquid. I walked up to it to get a better look, not understanding what I was looking at. I was drawn away by the sound of retching off towards the camp. Forgetting about the strange liquid, I started back to check up on my brother and Kathy. When I arrived back, the rain started again, making it too wet for us to start the fire back up. Kathy was looking pale and chilled down to the bone. I wish the cold, damp weather would pass so that we could finally leave. I started to wonder if I should take my brother's truck and maybe get some help. My fever hadn't gone down entirely, and we parked so far away, I feared that I would get too ill if I braved the hike through the woods. "Hey, is everything all right?" I asked. I put the wood away, covering it with plastic, hoping for it to stay dry. Kathy looked at me, a worried expression on her face. Before she could answer, my brother came out of his tent. Should have been impossible, but he looked paler than Kathy. His skin nearly void of any color. I decided then that I would try to get some help. We needed to get the hell out of the woods. "Hey, James, give me your keys, please," I said, holding out my hand for him to give me his truck keys from his pocket. He looked over at me as if I was speaking a different language. Shaking his head, he took a sip of water from a flask that Kathy handed to him. She looked scared stiff. James felt different. It's the way he was moving, not really looking at us. No, just give me another few hours to sleep, then we'll all go." I never should have given in. I slowly brought my hand back, trying to think of an argument. Truthfully, I was frightened to go into the woods alone. Just a few more hours, then we wouldn't even pack up our gear, we would just leave. James took Kathy's hand and they went back into their tent. Not being able to think of anything else to do, I went back into mine to get dry and warm. I was going to finish the last 100 pages of a book to give my brother time to sleep. I drifted off while I was reading. One moment I had a book in my hand, and the other, I was waking up in a pitch darkness. I sat up confused at what time it was. Slowly my eyes adjusted and I could see a hint of light coming through the tent. Slipping back into the cold, damp outside world, I looked over to see a very weak fire burning. My brother stood just within the light. I opened my mouth to call out to him, but something felt wrong. I couldn't place it. The air was tense, my stomach muscles started to lock up. Hearing me coming from my tent, my brother turned to look at me. He still looked pale as death. His face was the same. But I just knew in that moment I was no longer looking at my brother. He took steps towards me, an unknown purpose in his stride. I ran. Without any plan, I ran off into the woods, trying to get away from whatever he had become. I was only running for a few minutes when I saw the lights of a fire between the trees. It was faint, but I ran towards it, praying someone would help. I didn't think anyone was camping so close to us, and was thankful for it. I ran into the clearing, but my blood froze in my veins. It wasn't a new campsite, it was ours. I just ran back, and even though I was positive I ran straight, my brother stood by the dying coals, the orange light shining in his eyes. I ran again. It was dark, and the woods was just a maze of trees. It was understandable that I got turned around. A few more minutes of running, and I came crashing into our campsite again. In a blind panic, I just kept going. No matter what direction I took, I would always end up running towards our camp, my brother standing silently watching me, attempting and failing to escape. When I couldn't run anymore, I collapsed, gasping for air. I didn't understand what was going on. All I knew was I could no longer leave. "Please," I begged the pale figure. It was too late to save my brother, but if there was even a hint of him left, he would let me and Kathy leave. His face was going out of focus. For whatever reason, my brain was refusing to see what it truly looked like. Let me and Kathy leave. I sat on the cold ground, shaking in fear. Deep down, I knew my brother wasn't changing into something beyond my understanding simply because he shot a strange deer. My suspicions, I couldn't bear to say out loud, was confirmed by him when he finally spoke in a raspy voice. "I cannot let her go. After all, she ate some of it, too." My stomach sank, and I felt like I was going to be sick. Killing the white deer by accident could be forgiven, but cutting into its body to devour the flesh could not. The thing that was once my brother lunged at me. He grabbed me by the neck as I struggled desperately to get free. I got as far as the dying fire pile before he held me still, his strength far beyond my own. I kicked, I screamed, trying to pry him away from me. I couldn't see his face clearly, but I saw his mouth Oh God, whatever he became was something no human should ever see. It opened wide, with countless teeth shining in the dying firelight. He had turned into something so twisted because of his unforgivable sin. I was only saved because I thought for a brief moment I saw a white figure behind my brother, urging me to fight. I had nothing to lose. I reached over to the nearby coals, the fear causing me to ignore the pain of grabbing coals and ash to toss into the creature's face. He let out a scream of pain and let me go. I wasted no time scrambling free, but paused at the edge of the camp. I watched in horrified fascination as the thing that was once my brother screamed and thrashed, sickening cracking sounds coming from his body as he started to turn from human into something completely different, twisted with long, pale limbs. I couldn't stomach the sight. I almost couldn't stand the idea of leaving Kathy behind. She was either already dead or turning into the same thing. Inside of the tent and out of sight, I felt trapped. I knew if I left, I would end up back in the camp again. Off in the distance, I saw a hint of white through the trees, and I ran toward it. As I ran, I heard the monster I left behind screaming at me to stay. This time, instead of looping back around, I noticed a hint of shimmering liquid on the ground, and I followed it. Drop by drop, I kept going until my lungs felt like they were going to burst, and my legs burned. The force around me started to get lighter, until I found myself running right into a snow-covered parking lot. I collapsed again, feeling weak, and the snow soaked through my jeans. It wasn't the season for snow. The parking lot was right next to the ranger station, and when I came running out exhausted, the ranger saw me and came outside to see what was going on. I couldn't keep myself awake until he got to me, and I passed out in the slush. In the end, they never found James and Kathy. They found our abandoned campsite months ago and assumed us all dead. I could never tell them what really happened because I don't know myself. I don't feel as if this was all a dream or if my mind just snapped. I'm certain my brother's now something else out there inside the woods. I wonder why I was saved. What creature decided to show me the right way out? Was it the white deer because I didn't eat part of it? Or did it want me to live so that I could tell others about what happened? Whatever reason it might be, I'm thankful for my life. And if you're ever out there hunting, make certain you know what you're about to shoot before you pull the trigger, or else you'll make a mistake that's going to change your life forever. Entry 1. I've decided to keep this journal until I'm saved. Today is Monday, 8/25/2014. I'm currently stationed on the USS Kentucky as a Navy seaman, or it was, as the ship has sunk. I don't know the reason why it went under. My officer gave me duty below deck. As I was doing a quick inventory of the supplies in one of the storage rooms, there's a loud crash of some sort, and the ship shook violently. I was trapped under a closet that fell over during the crash, and the door closed itself, the automatic lock activating. Being trapped under a closet, in all honesty, I was slightly panicking. Alarms are going off. This wasn't how I imagined my morning going. I knew being stationed on the ship was bad news since I received my orders, but what I heard, champagne bottle didn't even break during the christening, which means bad luck. No amount of successful missions could have convinced me otherwise. I hate being right. The crash happened a few hours ago, but the ship's going down fast. I haven't been able to unlock the door from the inside, so for now, I'm trapped. Some of the flooding compartments have been closed off to prevent the sinking of the ship. Sadly for me, it did fuck all. It just means that I'm well and trapped here. Luckily, there's enough food and water to last me a few weeks. I hope at least. In all honesty, the main reason why I'm writing this down in some scraps of paper is to keep myself calm. See, if I start to panic, I'll waste oxygen. There's no way I have enough to use all the food here and the water if I hyperventilate. Entry 2. I managed to find a flashlight and a few batteries, so at least I can see my metallic prison. There's no way the military isn't looking for me right now. Captain must have sent out a distress signal, or it happened automatically. They're on the way to save me as I'm writing this. But as the ship is sinking deeper and deeper, and the loud groaning of the metal around me isn't giving me any hope that it'll be an easy operation for them. For now, all I can do is wait. Of course. Tried banging on the walls and the doors to get some measure of attention, but I guess also panicking. Didn't hear me or something. I mean, they'll notice that I'm not there during the head count. They have to. Maybe the captain even brought a radio to the escape boat. I'll be out of here before I know it. Yeah, enough writing for now. With so little happening, there isn't much to write about. I mean, maybe I could write a book about this. Become famous like that guy who got his hand stuck in that cliff. Entry 3. Damn, I need to figure out how to keep track of time down here. Some things happened, but it's hard to get a frame of reference. The ship's taken on more water, and it's falling towards the bottom of the goddamn North Atlantic. And I'm still trying not to panic, right? But with the water around me, it's becoming slowly darker and darker. So it's not the easiest thing in the world to manage right now. It's about pitch black out when I look through my window. It's hard to see out far. If I were to guess, I'd say that ship's about 2,500 feet deep. There's still some sunlight coming through, though, but it's not nearly enough for me to see. The ship's still creaking. My little steel room is damaged and all. Water will enter. I'll be fucked. Praying that doesn't happen. Entry 4. Must have been a day by now, right? Heard another loud crash. I'm guessing it was a few hours ago. It's hard to know just how long ago, with the sunlight completely gone from this depth. Either that or it's nighttime. The adrenaline's kept me up for so long, but with that comes the hunger. Eaten way too much of my supplies already. Although on the bright side, I managed to keep myself calm the entire time in order to preserve as much air as I can. Running a plethora of breathing exercises are actually helpful, and who knew? Absolutely no idea how long I can last with what I have, and I can't exactly try to open the door either. Can't know the situation on the other side of the door at all, so I only have the air in the room right now. Just hope the rescue mission is on their way already. It's quiet down here. Entry 8. Fuck, this is maddening. You know, waiting down here is so boring. You think that that'd be the least of my concerns, but I feel like I've been down here for days. No changes, no sounds. I haven't begun talking to myself, just to hear something other than the creaking of what's presumably left of the hull. I must have counted inventory 100 times by now. Found some flares. Thought about using them to start a fire, but it would just waste the precious oxygen in here. Though sometimes past, I'm not feeling lightheaded, right? I keep movement to a minimum, and the cabin's completely dry. There is, however, a problem with the cold. You see, like, with no sunlight coming down here to warm the water, it's definitely been a few days, at this point. So I must be below the level where the light can reach me. Cabin's become increasingly cold. Found some blankets. I'm using them to keep myself warm. I need to resort to using flares if this keeps up. And there's no point in saving oxygen if I freeze to death down here. The rescue's still coming. Right. Entry 10. Yet another problem to add to my increasingly big pile of shit. So literally, this time, where am I supposed to piss and shit? I mean, I can't go to the goddamn bathroom. I chose a random corner in my cell, which began tilting afterwards due to some fucking oceanic current or something. So the shit smear is spread nicely around the goddamn room. On top of that, the can I was using to piss in also fell right over. This place smells. It feels gross. For fuck's sake, guys, come here and fucking rescue me. I can't do close to anything at this point. Entry 13. Please, guys, please come soon. I can't stand it here anymore. One of the pipes began leaking, and it hasn't stopped. It's constant dripping now. Feels like Loki when Odin finally had enough of his shit, punished him by chaining him underneath a snake so that it could drip poison on his bitch ass. And the only two differences: firstly, I don't have a wife to catch the drops and make it stop making the noise, and two, I'm innocent. Okay, I did nothing to deserve being down here. What did I do? Tell me, I'll stop. Just let me out of this watery prison. Just drip, drip, drip. I'm losing my fucking mind. It's been going on for days. I haven't been able to sleep at all because of it. It's cold. I'm miserable. There's nothing to do except write, but there's nothing to write about. Entry 15. I don't think they're coming anymore. I only have a few sets of batteries for my flashlight, so I've been using them extremely sparingly lately. I found the box. So the flashlight should last about 55 to 60 hours on low, which is what I've been using and doing the math in my head with some pretty heavy guesswork as well. I came to the conclusion that I've been down here for nearly 2.5 weeks. Give or take a day. There's still plenty of food, there's water. I think oxygen, but what if they don't find me? What am I holding on for? I feel lonely out here. Back on the ship, I used to love staring at the night sky on deck, the stars above you, the ocean. It gives off a feeling of immense loneliness. But it's a feeling that you welcome if you're on a ship. You're always surrounded by people, constantly in communication with them. The nights on the deck were amazing. Up north here, you could see the aurora borealis in winter. Well, that was some months ago. Now though, now I miss the constant chatter. The people surrounding you are good ways of distracting you from how truly quiet the ocean actually is. I mean, sure, when you wanted to sleep back on the ship, you'd complain about the sounds of waves hitting the hull or the wind rushing outside, but compared to the people, it may as well not exist. Now I'm here. Alone. Only sounds I hear are the currents hitting my prison, but it's usually drowned out by the dripping. Goddamn dripping, it's maddening. Entry 18. Who knows where I am? I can't have drifted too far as I sank. I haven't heard too many sounds that might indicate movement. Pipes still dripping with water. The amount of dry floor space I have is shrinking day by day. I fear the hole's gonna rip at some point. Flood the entire room with that freezing water. I made a fire by lighting some wood from the crates with a flare and to keep myself somewhat warm. Doesn't do much. It's enough to make for some relative comfort. If only I could sleep. Constant dripping sounds keeping me awake most of the time. I feel like I haven't slept for days. My only fear is I run out of oxygen really soon if I keep the fire going. I only use it when it's too cold to bear. Entry 19. A sound. I hear a sound. It's some clicking noises that sound like the Geiger counter you hear in a Fallout game. I don't know what it was, but at least I'm not alone, right? I actually forgot what it's like to hear something aside from the dripping and the sounds that I make. It sounded far away, but the creature must have been huge. Maybe like a whale of some kind or something. But I'm not alone, right? That's the most important thing here. Couldn't possibly imagine what it's like to hear nothing but your own heartbeat and a constant dripping. What makes it worse is the feeling of being alone. So alone, in fact, that I began speaking to the dripping sound. Even giving it a fucking name. Mr. Drip. I feel like that man from Castaway, right? But at least he had light. I'm fucked. And Mr. Drip is an asshole who doesn't know when to shut up. Entry 22. Whoever said stare into the abyss will stare back. Never truly had to stare at one. See, the fear of the dark isn't actually fear of the dark, but instead fear of what's inside that darkness, right? So let me tell you, I've been staring at the darkness outside my little window for days. Trying to look for any sign of life ever since I had heard these sounds a few days ago. I don't know what to expect, but I welcome anything at this point. See, the Norse used to have stories about the Kraken. On old maps, he used to say, "Here be dragons," referring to the middle of the ocean, how they're uncharted territories. Even in the Bible, they talk about leviathans in the Old Testament, right? I'm not asking for any mythological creatures or legends, but I'd like something. For all I know, there are fishes, there's sharks, there's squids, or any other type of creature just a few feet away from my only portal into the darkness outside my cabin, and exactly due to that darkness, I can't see what in the abyss is staring back at me. I'm no longer afraid of what could be inside the darkness. I'm afraid that there's nothing. Entry 23. Dripping sound is speeding up. In addition, the metal surrounding me keeps groaning under the stress. Fear I don't have long before I run out of supplies, or I'll be crushed by the sea. I've had nothing but time here to think about what would be a worse way to go, you know? On one hand, you have wasting away. My body's slowly losing all its strength to the point where I can't do anything anymore. So think about food, or water, or sleep. In reality, it wouldn't be that different from what I'm currently doing anyway. On the other hand, there's drowning, or dying of the pressure. I have no idea what would kill me first if there were to be a small entrance to the cold outside. At least I imagine that if it was the pressure, it'd be fast. I mean, same as dying in space, right? Except the opposite. Kind of like an implosion, maybe. Drowning, though, that would be horrible. The feeling of needing to breathe, but only getting more and more water stuck in your lungs must be painful beyond all description. Thinking about this makes me realize there truly is no way out of here. At least I'd like to get it over with quickly. Entry 27. At some point in this, one cannot help but conclude that the rescue's no longer coming. You know, I've suffered enough for a lifetime, and if there is a hell, it can't be worse than this. I'm Samuel Rodriguez, 24 years old, from Tampa, Florida. I joined the U.S. Navy back in 2012 to pay for college. Never once did I expect to be sent to the North Atlantic, and never, and even less so, than I have that ship sink and leave me stranded at the bottom of the fucking ocean for over 4 weeks, alone. The best way to describe my predicament, the ocean makes you feel alone and helpless. We weren't meant to traverse the ocean, much less be underneath the waves. I was never afraid of the water or of the sea. When I was a boy, my father took me out to sail more times than I could count. And I was always a good swimmer, but if I make it out of this alive, I swear I'll never touch the sea again in my life. I'm done with it. The sea, the ocean, they can fuck off. You know, aside from my immediate family, I won't be missed. I have a few friends, sure, but nothing close. Didn't have a girl back home either. Went on a date with one, though, and before I left for the Big Blue, I didn't even like her. I just didn't want to be alone. And in hindsight, I should have listened to my mom. I should have gotten a trade job. It would have been boring, maybe, but at least I didn't have to go into debt or die at the bottom of the goddamn ocean to pay for a fucking law degree. If these notes are ever found, let my parents, Carlos and Linda Rodriguez, know that I love them, and that I am proud to be their son. I know that they did their best for me, and for that, I can't be more grateful. Entry 28. Yeah, I've been thinking. It's been a few hours since my last entry, and I'm writing this by fire. I narrowed down what caused the ship crash in the first place to either a drift, ice, or sea quake. If it is the former, then it's just a huge fucking cliche. Does my life really come down to an extra in Titanic? I'm afraid so. Unless I forgot to write it down, there weren't any aftershocks, so a sea quake seems unlikely. Maybe sea quakes don't have aftershocks like earthquakes do. Well, it shouldn't be that different. Hard to tell from up there. All I remember clearly was a crashing sound. Ship rocking, alarms going off. I thought about those minutes a million times the past few weeks. Storms aren't that uncommon in the North Atlantic either. Maybe it was that. It was cloudy and misty. Winds there nonstop. I can't believe I even started missing that cold that me and my mates on the ship always used to complain about. Entry 29. Food's running low. Water ran out just yesterday. I'm using the fire to try to boil the seawater and make it drinkable, but, it doesn't work. I'm thirsty. It well and truly is the end of the road for me. Air's getting thinner. Ocean makes everyone powerless. If I want to go out on my own terms, I still have that box cutter I used to open the boxes. Place these notes in a container along with my dog tags, if it's ever found, Please give them to my parents, but I'm not counting on it. Die, useless death, miles under the sea in the pitch black darkness of the fucking ocean. I hate this place. Can't believe this is the end for me. We weren't made to be out here. At least in the forest or in the desert, you can still move, right? You can still hear. You think of something, some way to survive longer than this. People have been living in those places for millennia. Out here, though? Out here, they said the Vikings were the first to sail to America on relatively small ships compared to what Columbus used. I can't imagine how they did it, let alone survive one storm in those ships. You say the ocean's the biggest graveyard on the planet for a reason, and I can't agree with those people more. Some scientists would kill for the opportunity to study the life around me, but for as far as I can tell, there isn't any. I should have stayed back home in Tampa. I miss my friends and my family. I miss going sailing with my dad. Dumb arguments I had with my mom. I miss how my uncle would drop by whenever he pleased just to get some coffee and then to move on with his day like usual. This isn't the type of loneliness you can just get out there in the world. It's something that I can't fully describe using my notes. No matter how you would try to simulate it up there, it won't be the same. It's not something I'd wish upon my worst enemy. Okay, this is it. My final act of defiance against all this. I may not have been in control during any of this, but I survived out here on my own means, and I'll die by it. Signed, Samuel Rodriguez. Eric Michaels didn't like the Dressmakers Dummy as soon as he laid eyes on it. Then again, he was already prepared to hate anything his wife Sarah brought home from the Van Draven house. If ever there was a haunted house, a truly haunted house, the Van Draven house was it. The site of both multiple murder and suicide. It sat overlooking the village like some broken idol for nearly 300 years. The place was cursed, damned, and Eric Michaels wanted nothing to do with it. And he sure as hell didn't want anything from the decrepit wreck in his home. But when Sarah had heard there was going to be an auction there, she had promptly lost her mind and immediately called up her friend Marcia, arranging to meet at the Van Draven estate promptly at 8 the following morning. Eric would well imagine them both sat outside the front gate like a couple of vultures, decked out in their best summer dresses, just waiting for the poor auctioneer to open the doors so they could sweep in, pick over the fallen carcass of the Van Draven house. In the end, she had returned with only 2 purchases, a dressmaker's dummy and a dusty set of crystal-cut wine glasses that Eric told her that he would never drink from. She had laughed at him then, calling him a superstitious fool before patting him fondly on the cheek and returning to the meticulous cleaning of her newfound treasures. Eric sighed and left her to it. It was all very well for her to call him a fool, but she was an out-of-towner from up-country, as the locals were fond of saying. Eric had been born and bred in Mavagezi. He had heard the stories passed on from generation to generation, had gathered in tents on many a Halloween night, and listened with terrified fascination as his friends and sometimes their older brothers told them gruesome stories of Lucas Van Draven, who had slaughtered his wife, unborn child, and even his new servants, before throwing himself from a nearby cliff into the dark waters of the Atlantic. Stories of the Jonas family found dead in the basement of that house, their bodies twisted as if by some terrible force. She had never scurried past the house as a child, walking home alone from school as the sunset made the cracked and shattered windows burn with a seemingly evil intent. Yes, the Van Draven house was as much a part of the village as the fishing boats in the harbor and the summer people who came to visit every year. One day, he supposed, when the old place became decrepit enough, they would pull it down, and then all the evil things inside would rest. But for now, it still stood a monument to the madness, a madness that had now spread to his home. The first real argument started when Sarah moved the dressmaker's dummy into their bedroom. Eric had seen the god-awful thing stood in the corner of the large bay window next to Sarah's sewing machine, and had promptly flipped out. There was no way that he was getting even 1 minute's sleep with that ugly-looking thing looming over him, but Sarah was having none of it. The whole thing devolved into a shouting match where Eric threatened to sleep on the sofa till that damn thing was gone, and Sarah storming out, telling him that he was welcome to it. She had left him sat there on the bed fuming, wanting to scoop the fucking thing up and throw it down the stairs, but not quite daring to do so. Instead, he stood up and he slowly crossed the room, wondering what the hell she saw in something so ugly. The dummy was typical of its kind, legless, armless. It was nothing more than a headless torso impaled on a tarnished brass stand. The material covering the body looked to Eric like a light hessian, torn and ripped in many places. The overall feel of the thing was one of age and neglect. Curious now, he slid off the bed down to his knees and peered underneath, looking for a date or even a maker's mark. What he saw there caused him to recoil in horror. The underside of the thing was covered in a dark maroon stain that could only be blood. Old and dry, but blood nevertheless. The bottom of the thing was covered in it, drenched in it. Reaching out with a trembling hand, he touched the stains and was suddenly falling the room spinning, disappearing as if he was being pulled down by some black tunnel. The room was gone, replaced by something else, somewhere else. All about him burnt candles, hundreds of candles, and blood. There was blood everywhere. It lay in puddles upon the hardwood floor, ran in rivulets down the walls. Even the ceiling dripped with a crimson rain, splashing, hissing where it made contact with the flickering candles, filling the air with its choking scent. Reaching down with a hand that was no longer his own, he pulled 2 wooden knitting needles from the abomination that lay dead at his feet and span about. A woman was climbing to her feet, quite naked and covered in blood. "The master," she cried. "Oh, Lucas, what have you done to our son?" Again, that terrible hand reached out, grabbing the woman by the hair and thrusting the needles into the soft flesh of her throat. She staggered away, gurgling blood, gushing from her mouth as she tugged at the needle buried deep in her throat. Slipping, she cried out, grabbing a nearby dressmaker's dummy, clinging on for dear life, pulling it at her, raking it with her nails as she pulled it down on top of her, pinning her beneath. She reached out, begging, pleading, but he was going away now. Back into the blackness. Back to before, to now, to here. To this place. With a cry, he opened his eyes and yelled out in disgust. He was holding the dressmaker's dummy, holding it tight to his chest like some terrible dance partner. Thrusting it away, he backed up, trying to look everywhere at once. Dizzy, disoriented, he tripped over the corner of the bedroom rug, crashing to the floor, his head hitting the radiator with terrible force. The pain was blinding, turning his vision red, then mercifully he passed out into blackness. He awoke 2 days later with 14 stitches and a bad concussion. Sarah had found him unconscious on the bedroom floor, his head laying in a pool of his own blood, and had immediately called for an ambulance. He had only awoken once in the back of the ambulance as it rushed him towards St. Austell's General, but his words had been slurred and nonsensical, something about candles and blood before he passed out again. But now he was awake, doing well. His doctor had told him that he would be able to go to work at the end of the week, after a few days of observation. For the next few days, he lay there, the tedium only broken by meals and Sarah's frequent visits. At nighttime, he would lay awake, staring at the ceiling, wondering what he was going to do about the dressmaker's dummy. There was no way that he could tell Sarah what had happened. She would think he had hit his head a little too hard. Besides, she would never believe him, and who could blame her? He barely believed it himself. He knew only one thing. The damn thing had to go, but how to get rid of it? That was the question. He was still pondering that same question on the night that they released him from the hospital. It was 7:30 at night, and Eric was standing outside the hospital entrance, doing his best not to obstruct the automatic sliding doors that kept opening and closing, much to the annoyance of the on-call duty nurse at reception, as he tried to take shelter from the pouring rain. Sarah should have been here to pick him up over an hour ago, but she hadn't shown up. Worried, Michael rang the house, but the phone was engaged. He tried 2 more times with the same results before trying her mobile, which rang for a couple of minutes, then cut to her answering machine. Eric had a sudden sense of foreboding, so strong that he actually became lightheaded and nearly dropped his mobile phone as he leaned heavily against the side of the building. After a few deep breaths, he quickly dialed the number of their good friend and neighbor, Helen Daniels. Thankfully, she answered on the second ring, and was more than happy to go knock on the door and see what Sarah was up to. No, Michael didn't mind waiting. Michael stood there, sweating and listening to the silence for what seemed like forever, but in less than 5 minutes, Helen was back telling him yes, the car was still there, and no one was answering the door, and yes, it was locked, and all the lights were on. Eric hung up on Helen before she could start asking questions and called for a taxi. Less than 10 minutes later, he was speeding towards home. Stepping out into a rain-soaked street, he paid the taxi driver and turned to face the house. Just like Helen had said, the car was still in the drive, and the house was lit up like a Christmas tree, with both the upstairs and the downstairs lights switched on. Feeling a little more relieved, Eric tried the front door, and finding it locked, just like Helen had said, he dug in his pocket and pulled out his keys. Stepping into the porch, he opened the door to the hall and suddenly stopped, his wife's name dying on his lips. The hall phone was hanging by its cord, gently swinging back and forth. Sarah's handbag was lying on the floor, its contents scattered and strewn all about the stairs. Jesus God, the stairs. The stairs were covered in blood. It was spattered all over the banister, slowly running down the wall in rivulets, soaking into the carpet beneath. Hitching hardly able to breathe, Michael staggered back into the porch and vomited noisily into the corner. He stayed that way, holding onto the wall, sweating, shivering, until his stomach stopped its twitching and heaving for a moment. He considered just leaving. No one could lose that much blood and survive, but if there was a chance, even a small one. He tried not to think as he ascended the stairs, feeling the blood squelch under his feet. On the landing was one of Sarah's shoes. It lay on its side and was filled with blood. Eric's nerve broke, then he turned to run, grabbing onto the sticky banner to stop him falling headlong into the stairs. He was only halfway down when he suddenly stopped, reeling backwards. There was a woman at the bottom of the stairs. She was naked and covered in blood, a gaping hole in her throat. Michael screamed as he recognized the woman from his terrible vision. He tried to move, to run away, but he was frozen, unable to move. The woman started up the stairs, her eyes glittering like black jewels from the deep sockets of her eyes. Michaels looked on in horror as she smiled up at him, revealing rotting teeth from which dark blood now began to ooze. Letting out a cry of terror, his paralysis broke and he turned, fleeing up the stairs, past the bedroom door, meaning to lock himself in the bathroom, but suddenly she appeared right in front of his face. "Our son!" she screamed, spattering his face with noxious blood. Terrified, half-blinded, he scrambled backwards, trying to wipe her vileness from his face. Screaming, she lunged forward, shoving him hard in the chest, sending him crashing through the bedroom door and onto the floor. His already battered head glanced off the bedroom table, and for a moment, the world darkened and he feared that he would pass out. Groaning, he raised himself up onto his elbows, trying to look everywhere at once, but the doorway was empty. Sobbing with relief, he clambered to his feet, ignoring the throbbing in his head. Suddenly, he was sure that she was behind him, ready to wrap her cold, dead hands around his throat, and with a cry, he spun around, his hands held high in a warding-off gesture, but the woman was not there. Only his wife, Sarah. For a moment, Eric Michaels was not sure what he was seeing. Then he began to laugh. The laughter turned into a scream, and the scream a shriek, as he clawed at his face, at his eyes, desperate not to see, yet unable to look away. The dressmaker's dummy stood in its usual place, but now a bloody, crumpled figure lay at its feet. Bone and sinew gleamed wetly under the merciful glare of the overhead light. The torn and battered body would have been unrecognizable except for Sarah's head, where it now sat atop the shoulders of the dressmaker's dummy. Her eyes rolled back to white, her blood-covered mouth wrenched open in a silent scream. The blood from the ragged stump of her neck ran down onto what was left of her tattered skin, which had now been stitched and sewn with crude stitches onto the dressmaker's dummy. As he looked on with horror, the whole thing began to vibrate. The empty arms starting to twist and turn, reaching out towards him. Still screaming, he started to back away. He heard laughter, then, not with his own ears, but echoing around the broken vaults of his mind. And suddenly realized Sarah's Not poor dead lips were writhing, showing her bloody teeth. Her eyes now watched him, glaring at him as the vibrations grew stronger, getting closer and closer. The police found him there a few hours later. After an anonymous call, raving and ranting, his mind broken as he cradled the head of his poor, murdered wife in his arms. As for the dressmaker's dummy, there was no sign. In the Van Draven house, time did not stand still. It crawled and undulated. In the library, ancient books tumbled from wooden shelves. In the hall, the sound of booted heels scrabbled on the winding staircase. In the kitchen, an ear-piercing scream followed by breaking glass, then stillness. In the silence, a grandfather clock ticked, and the house waited, and waited, and waited. This is not an easy story to tell. Just thinking about what happened still gives me chills. Lately I've been seeing a therapist to talk about what I saw, about what lives amongst us humans. It lives within the deepest depths of the ocean. However, he never seems to believe me. He tends to blame everything I saw in my trauma and tells me that my mind is making up these thoughts that aren't truly real. I'm writing this now in hopes that you, whoever you are, will believe my story. Here it is. I've been working as a marine biologist for quite some time. A few years, to say the least. I used to love everything about the ocean and was so mesmerized by it all. The glistening water, the plants, the sea life, even the size was all the more reason on why I became a marine biologist. It was the middle of October, and a higher up from my research team gave me a call about a new unexplored region, somewhere off the coast of the Pacific. Now you may think somewhere so far out in the ocean may have made me decline the decision to go and explore such vast open areas, but no. In fact, just the thought of the idea made me ecstatic. I accepted the offer. I made the arrangements, and I quickly set off. The research team consisted of 4 people: Mike, Liz, my best friend Jackson, and myself. Together, we've explored all kinds of places, discovered the most bizarre set of animal life, and even became the first group to do a deep-sea dive inside the Mariana Trench. We were truly a fierce team, and every dive we took, every exploration that we've set out on, it was all done with little to no fear. I always have been fond of the ocean, yeah, but I can't recall a time where I was actually scared of it. That is, up until now. We set off early morning, wasting no time at all to get to our destination. So what do you think is out there? Dunno. New species, maybe? Mike and Liz loved to discover new types of animals, while me and Jackson were more fond of the plant life. If so, let's hope nothing big enough to eat us, says Jackson, approaching the side of the boat. He gazed out at the open body of water, watching the city slowly disappear from our view. He closed his eyes and inhaled deeply. Smell that? Fresh air of open adventures, said our captain, cutting off Jackson as he spoke. Now let's not try to be out here for too long, understand? It's an area that we don't know of. We all agreed, began making plans on what specific things to keep an eye on. Well, being so far out, there's obviously not going to be any type of ground level whatsoever, and chances of us even getting an inch close to it is very slim. Mike's right. We should have the 2 of us search for unknown species near the surface and the other 2 explore deeper, says Jackson, caressing the lining of his jaw as a sign of thought. It was no surprise that Mike and Liz would be together. They were practically partners in crime. How about me and Jackson dive down? Evan and Liz, you guys stay at the top. It was surprising to all of us. How about me and Jackson dive down? Evan and Liz, you guys stay at the top. This was surprising to all of us. Why the sudden change? I questioned, glancing over at Liz. I don't know. Just thought we'd swap our partners for once, yeah? Jackson put his hand on my shoulder. Idiot. We're all partners here, but I guess switching it up a bit wouldn't hurt. Liz approached me with a cheerful look. Then it settled. Let's make this a great expedition. Time went by pretty fast, and it was finally time for us to take our dive. As I approached the deck, Mike and Liz already had their gear on, and Jackson was just about to dive in. Come on, hurry up. Put that last little bit of gear on, let's go. Mike sounded so excited. More than usual, in fact. Yeah, just give me a sec. After finally putting on the last bit, I hurried over to the side of the boat. Jackson and Mike dropped down first, then Liz. However, before I could get my chance to touch the water, our captain rushed out. Pick up signs of a storm on the radar, which is quite odd. Didn't see any type of signs of a storm approaching until now. You guys better hurry back. Boom. A nice-sized wave hit the blind side of the boat, sending me flying off into the water and pushing the boat into the others. Me flying off into the water? I hurried and put on my mask as the power of the wave forced me down under. I watched Mike and Jackson get pushed back further and eventually dragged down by the follow-up of more waves. I grabbed Liz's arm before she could get pulled away any further. We both swam up. Jesus, Captain, are you... Oh my God. What is it? I followed Liz's eyes up and saw a giant, monstrous wave approaching us, ready to crash down right on the boat. Captain! The sound of water crashing and flowing in all sorts of directions snapped me back. I tried to keep calm, but in all my years, I've never been in this type of situation before. Liz! Where's Liz? I looked around, giving myself a headache due to how fast I was turning my head. Crackling. Evan, I'm right here. The radio sounded distorted, and Liz was almost unrecognizable. Liz? Liz, can you hear me? What the hell just happened? Questioned Jackson over the staticky radio. We got hit. I'm too far under to see the boat. Okay, let me just try contacting him. Jackson? Are you there? Jesus, Evan? Please tell me you're seeing what I'm seeing, said Liz, her voice sounding shaky. Confused, I looked around, and to my horror, I saw it. It looked like the edge of the world. Just how deep were we? The ground ended off in a completely straight line, and beyond that was nothing but pitch black darkness. What the hell is a cliff doing here? Mike? Oh my God, I thought I lost you, said Liz in worry. Nah, still here. Jackson? Evan? I'm here. We lost comms with Jackson. Wait. I think I see him. Look down to the edge. Me and Liz both looked down and saw Jackson, slowly moving off of the edge. Jackson? What the hell are you doing? Get back up here now! I tried to stop him. We all did. But he wouldn't listen. I don't know what happened to him, but I still hear the words in my head, the final words. As Jackson slowly came off the edge, he said something that threw all three of us. Do you see it? It's down there, waiting for the right moment. What are you talking about, Jackson? What's waiting? Just come on back. Let's get out of here, please. Jackson let out a small gasp. He says, thank you. Thank you for awakening me. You set me free. Then, from a calming voice to the sound of fear, he said, oh my God. Guys, we shouldn't have come down here. We aren't alone. Jackson started violently thrashing his arms, trying to swim up and away from the dark abyss. It's coming! Oh God, it's coming! It's gonna kill us all! We're all gonna die! And that's when we saw it. A long, dark, Greenish, sort of scaly, long body quickly rushed up. In size, it was massive, about the size of 4 great-sized mansions, but even then, I don't think even that was enough to explain just how huge this thing was. I watched Jackson get swallowed by it whole. The mouth area was so damn large, it took up most of the abyss. The teeth were the size of giant, icy glaciers, and they were very, very sharp. However, that wasn't the scariest part about its mouth. What frightened me the most was the rows of teeth the thing had. In a circular look, I saw 5 rows of teeth sticking out. Holy shit, said Mike. The creature then took off further away. We watched for what felt like 10 minutes of its body swimming away. Then from the darkness, I saw 2 giant white lights. Though they weren't lights at all, they were the creature's pupils as its face slowly approached us. And it spoke to us. Its voice deep and stern. You do not belong. You have been abandoned, and soon you will be forgotten as well. I saw its body make all kinds of curves and rotations in the distance. There seemed to be no end to it. Mike, what are you doing? Liz questioned in fear. I looked down to see Mike moving towards the creature. I do not belong. I've been abandoned. I will soon be forgotten. I am nothing. Those were Mike's last words, as I saw him move ever so slightly towards the creature, almost as if he was being pulled into it. I looked at the creature and I saw its mouth. Its mouth was open. It's stretched so far out that it could fit multiple of our boats into it. And as I stared, I felt myself muttering something. I do not belong. The same words said by Mike. I quickly forced myself to turn away. Liz, turn away now! She was nowhere to be found. I looked down once more and saw her, repeating the same words as Mike and slowly moving towards the creature's mouth. No. I wanted to say something. Believe me, I did, but I just couldn't. I knew I wouldn't be able to get through to her, and I knew what was going to happen if I stayed any longer. I quickly began to swim up as my heart pounded inside my chest. Please, please let me make it. In the distance, I saw the boat slowly sinking down to the ground. Oh, God, no. The surface slowly began to appear. Just a bit more. Then, after what felt like forever, I finally broke the surface of the water and began to swim faster than I've ever swam in my life. I don't know what direction I was heading in, but I didn't care, just as long as I wasn't in the same direction as that thing. I didn't even think to call it a creature anymore. I think I swam for about 15 minutes before my arms got tired, and my legs began to give out on me. There was nothing in sight, and I soon gave up hope. I laid myself back and I floated. As I did, I began to have flashbacks. Flashbacks that went back to when I first discovered the ocean, to when my parents first took me swimming at the beach. It all appeared to me as a blur, but it slowly faded into darkness. I awoke inside of a hospital, doctors surrounding me as I tried to keep my eyes open. Stay still. Don't move. Jackson. Mike. The search teams weren't able to find your friends nor the boat. It's lucky they found you. It was then that I had one last flashback, one last image in my brain. It was a vision of the thing that killed my friends. Jackson, Mike, Liz, all long gone. Doctors say I ended up fainting shortly after waking up and became unresponsive. I then went into a short-term coma, one only lasting a few weeks to a month. When I woke up, the hospital room was empty, but the space around me was filled with get-well cards and colorful balloons by my bedside. I was later checked out of the hospital and got to return to my home. Now that I returned back to work, of course not. I'll never go back. Not after what happened. After a while, I began experiencing night terrors, hallucinations every once in a while. And hell, I even developed Thalassophobia, the fear of deep bodies of water, just like the ocean. I soon started to feel like I was losing my mind. I started hearing voices in my head. Visions of watching my friends be swallowed by that monstrous thing. My entire life felt like it was falling apart, which is why I eventually ended up going to a therapist. But not even he could help. Now I find myself writing this, not knowing when to end it. What I do know is that we're not alone. This world does not belong to us. I don't belong. I've been abandoned, and I'll soon be forgotten. I am nothing. We are not alone. The traffic was heavy in downtown Toronto during rush hour. Driving slowly, we made our way along roads crammed with other cars, bike messengers, streetcars, and jaywalking pedestrians. Tall buildings towered over us all around, glass-walled skyscrapers and concrete behemoths. Stopped at a red light adjacent to an alley, the stench of a dumpster overfilled with week-old seafood waste and used diapers wafted over, making me gag. We were on our way to a baseball game, and my brother had found a cheap parking lot online. The only catch was that it was a bit of a hike to the Rogers Center, where the Blue Jays played their games. It was taking forever to get to the discount parking place, immersed in the heavy traffic. At one point, it took us 15 minutes just to make a right turn due to the constant crush of pedestrians and car traffic. It was a hot day. I was getting sick of driving, sick of other people flaunting their utter contempt for every single traffic law, not to mention basic human decency. The idea of 30 more minutes fighting through city streets was too much to bear, and I pulled into the next underground parking garage I saw, telling my brother Noel that I would pay whatever the cost was myself. He looked shocked. This place would be likely triple the cost. But he shrugged it off and said, "Do what I liked." The steel sliding door rolled up on its tracks to let us in. They closed down, shut behind us, drenching the tunnel in near total darkness. I had to stop the car, turning on my headlights to see as we wound our way downward into the parking structure. There were very few signs in the dimly lit garage, only one-way street signs pointing to the left, then to the right, and telling us where to go. All the parking spots were filled near the top, so we continued going down the ramps, deeper and deeper into the parking structure. Cars were parked in every single spot. There was not one to be had as we went down through levels. A, B, C, D, E, F, G, H, I, J, K, L. Wow, this is starting to get ridiculous, I said, as we entered section T. I've never seen a parking garage that goes down this far, Noel marveled, as we turned another corner and descended even deeper. I started feeling dizzy from the constant turning in circles going down the ramps of the parking structure. Slowing down, I felt woozy for a moment. Then I started driving again, slowly at first. Felt like it was hard to breathe so far down beneath the earth, the air thick and suffocating. "This place is huge," Noel said, as we got down to level X. It was starting to get more and more unsettling, driving downward in the darkness. It's just a never-ending sea of black cars. Every single one looked identical after a while, like they were mirror images of each other. They had dark-tinted windows, no logo to distinguish the brand, the make, or the model. This place is starting to creep me out. Can we go back? Like, just reverse out of here, man? There's nobody behind you. I tried to go backwards, but found there was a sliding steel door blocking the path going back up. I think they were automated to let us go through, but then came back down once we were past. All of them functioned seamlessly on sensors so that we hadn't even noticed them, but I imagined dozens of them leading all the way back up, blocking our path. Something occurred to me suddenly. Have you seen any doors other than those? I mean, any stairs leading up out of here? He shook his head. Lines of apprehension furrowed into his face. No, I haven't seen any people down here other than us either. We got out of the car together and tried to lift up the steel door, straining with all of my strength. I tried to pull it up out of the ground. It wouldn't budge. There was no help intercom or any other way of getting a hold of someone running this place. Frustrated, I pulled out the tire iron from the trunk and drove it between the pavement and the door, trying to pry it open. It wouldn't budge. Even with all of my body weight trying to force it upwards, my hands were getting cold and going numb, and I realized it was chilly down here on the lower levels. Much colder than the balmy summer night up on the street. This was the first moment we began to suspect something was really wrong. I mean, still, we had no choice but to keep going downwards, it seemed. There was nowhere else to go. After waiting for what seemed like hours for someone else to come through the door, we decided to try going forward a little ways more. I just hoped at some point the ramps would lead us out and would bring us back to the surface. Since that had been my experience with parking garages in the past, I mean, why would anyone build an underground parking facility with no exit at all? I started driving again, my hands gripping the steering wheel with white knuckles. My breaths were coming far too quickly and my heart was beating fast. I told myself to try to stay calm, try to convince myself that this was okay, this was normal. Suddenly, the letters on the wall indicating which level we were on began to change. After the Z, they stopped being recognizable from our alphabet, or from any other that I had seen on Earth. They appeared ancient, druidic, carved into the stone with precision. Other than that, the place was the same, dim, flickering fluorescence glowing overhead, black cars going on forever as you went down each row. Only the light seemed to be getting dimmer with each level we went down, and it was getting colder too. I turned on the heater, trying to warm up the car, and that was when I noticed my breath was pluming frostily into the air with each breath, as was my brother's. What is this place? Noah asked. I didn't have any answer. The structure made no sense. It wasn't really a parking garage, though. That was becoming abundantly clear. We kept going down, deeper and deeper, feeling like Indiana Jones and his companions exploring a never-ending underground cavern. There was nothing to see, other than rows of black cars, one after another, each level the same until they weren't. At a certain point, the architecture started to look wonky. I don't know how to describe it other than that. It was like a kid had drawn up the plans for it, instead of professional engineers or architects. The cars were crammed closer together in places, almost touching each other at strange angles. In other sections, things were spaced far apart. We almost could have squeezed our car in between two others. Almost, but not quite. And even if we could, there was nowhere to go. We had already established that there was no doors leading to stairs anywhere, no elevators or other points of egress either. We went down to the next level. Simoleon. The car's roof almost scraped against the ceiling. The wheels nearly lifted off the ground as we rounded the bend in an uneven ramp. Okay, this place is seriously freaking me out, my brother said, gripping the oh shit handle on his side of the car. Me too, man. Me too. Clearly going down further was not working. We were just going deeper and deeper into the dark abyss of madness that this place held within it. But getting out of the car was no longer viable either. We were dressed in t-shirts and shorts, since it was a hot summer day. But I can only guess how cold the temperature in the parking garage was at this point. I had the heat cranked up to the maximum, and we were both still shivering. The gas light began to flash yellow, catching my eye. I didn't mention this fact to Noel. Not yet. I didn't want to scare him any more than he already was. We continued going downward, the light now sparse and separated by huge gaps of distance. Sometimes only one defective light was flickering for an entire level, then absent entirely in others. Our surroundings were continuing to get stranger and stranger, no longer resembling a parking garage anymore, but a cavernous hellscape. The darkness and the feeling of suffocating beneath the ground was becoming impossible to ignore. I began to hyperventilate with claustrophobia, feeling that we were on our way downwards towards our inevitable deaths, trapped far beneath the earth, or perhaps something much worse than death. Perhaps we would simply continue driving downward forever into blackness. round and round in spiraling circles. Finally, the car began to sputter and die as it ran out of gas. I wished more than anything at that moment I had driven around with more than just a quarter of a tank. We would have had more time to think of a plan if I had just sprung for a fill-up the last time I had visited the gas station. Noel didn't seem surprised. He'd probably noticed the gaslight too and just decided not to say anything about it. As the car coasted to a stop in the pitch blackness, I looked around. It was pure darkness in all directions. We couldn't even see a few feet in front of the car, despite the headlights still running off the battery. The darkness was getting thicker, more tenacious, and suffocating all around us. I imagined it wouldn't be long before it finished us, invading our lungs and our bloodstreams like a noxious gas, paralyzing us with dread before painfully poisoning us to death with our own terror. The car battery died abruptly, much faster than it should have, and we were plunged into complete darkness. I turned the key back and forth to no avail. The battery was done for. So were we. The sounds could be heard outside the car, sounds of movement, scurrying noises, scratching claws, raking against the steel doors of various nearby automobiles, long ear-splitting screeches getting closer. Something began to bump against the right side of the car, jostling it to the other side as we shivered from the cold and grabbed hold of whatever we could to brace ourselves from what might come next. It felt like something huge was brushing up against the car, like a huge worm beneath the surface of the earth, using these tunnels as passage. For a while, it felt like the car would tip over. As the sound of the thing moved past outside, dragged on and on forever, but eventually it ceased, and the car settled back on its axles. It was silent again in the darkness. Freezing cold, lonely, despite the presence of my brother mere inches away, I felt as if I would die down here. My life began to flash before my eyes as I waited for death to come in whatever form it would take. I remembered my phone suddenly in my pocket. The screen would give off a little bit of light, and that was a relief. It was still a signal somehow, even all the way down here, and just enough battery to type this up and send it out to you all as a warning. If you happen upon the parking garage, the one with too many levels, don't go down any further. Stay near the surface, get out while you still can. And if you see a parking attendant, please tell him we're stuck down here. Help us. Hey there kids, it's me, MrCreepyPasta, and before we get started on tonight's story, I'm going to let you know about the Chilling app. I've talked about the Chilling app before, but I want to let you guys know about it again, because I'm on it, and also because there's a whole bunch of new stories that I've just done for them that came out this month, including a series that I've been really into. I don't get to choose the stories that go on there. I'm going to say that right out. I don't get to choose the stories that go on there. They pick out the stories, which they have picked out some really, really good ones, including a series called The Space in Between that I have been riveted to my seat to know how it ended. And now I know how it ended, but you won't know how it ends unless you go check out the Chilling app. The Chilling app links are in the description down below, and if you go quick, and by quick I mean I think it's just like a few more days, so really quick, you can enter to be able to win an Oculus Quest 2 bundle, which includes the Oculus Quest 2, Resident Evil 4, Blair Witch Oculus Quest Edition, The Exorcist VR, and a $250 Amazon gift card. So I mean, hey, there's really no part that's bad about starting your free trial now. And now, on to tonight's story. As I pulled up in front of the shop, I had to recheck my directions. It was a dingy little hole in the wall stuffed between a Dollar General and a computer repair shop. It looked like it had just existed here since the creation of the first VHS tape. The windows were covered in a thick yellow paper, and the outside was caked in a film of old dirt. The sign on the door said open, but it was barely visible through the dirty window. There was no way this place was what I wanted. When I was a kid, I remember watching a show on cable called Children of Man. As a kid, the premise of the show appealed to me. The show was about kids living in an island out in the Pacific trying to survive day-to-day trials. The producers had gotten 40 kids from all over America, ages 10 to 12, and dropped them off with supplies and instructions on how to survive. The host, Chris Mansworth, was a survival expert, and he would create challenges every day for the kids to complete. There were 4 teams of 10 kids, and the winner of each challenge got something cool for their area of the village. I watched the show religiously as a kid, every Saturday night, right after The Simpsons. The show would come on and I would be enthralled. I always imagined that I was on the island with them, surviving day to day. The challenges were always neat, too. They had the kids gut and clean their own meat, dig wells by hand, build rafts for the raft race, and make aqueducts so their village could have running water. It was a neat idea. But the show just stopped after 8 episodes. I watched the show religiously as a kid, every Saturday night right after The Simpsons. No new episodes came out, and the station never gave a reason. This was before the internet, and there was no way to check for online updates. So the show slipped off into obscurity, and my 10-year-old self just forgot about it. I remember the show again a few years ago when Mom sent me a box of my stuff from the attic. There was a couple of old VHS tapes in there, and between Batman the Animated Series and the Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles were 8 tapes with handwritten labels that read Children of Man. We had a VHS recorder when I was a kid, and I can remember recording my favorite shows to watch later. I was excited to get to see the old show again, the memories flooding back, and I started looking for a VHS player amongst the tapes in the box. Well, there wasn't one, but a quick trip to the Goodwill and $15, and I had a gently used VCR hooked up to my TV. And I watched all 8 episodes back to back and fell in love with the show all over again. I remember the kids I liked, Robert and Catherine, were my favorites, but many of the kids had also been given a lot of screen time, and it was hard not to like them too. As I watched, I found myself wanting to see how the show ended all over again. As I watched the show again, I began to notice, well, something a little darker under the surface. Something I hadn't noticed as a kid. The village was divided into 4 teams: green snakes, bluebirds, red foxes, and brown mice. The teams had mostly been divided up by background, which seemed very divisive to me as an adult. The green snakes did most of the hunting for the village. A lot of their kids had a rural background, while the brown mice did most of the farming and the gathering, because, well, they had come from a farm background. The red foxes were in charge of construction and upkeep. They were the smarter kids, and they worked with the bluebirds, who were in charge of food management and cooking the meals. Every team had a representative who sat on a council. Robert sat for the green snakes, Catherine sat for the bluebirds, Marco for the red foxes, and Charine for the brown mice. As the show went on, it became apparent that Robert didn't trust Marco, and with good reason. Marco and Charine had formed a kind of alliance of their own, though most of it was because Marco bullied her into doing what he wanted. Robert and Catherine had set up their own alliance, and Robert started holding out food to sway Catherine's decisions. The village needed food, and Robert pointed out that he and Catherine were the only ones providing it. Robert and Catherine wanted a fair split for everyone, but Marco tried to split them into a class system that would put his foxes in the higher tier. Robert didn't like that, and it became clear that if Chris hadn't been there, we would have seen a lot more fights. Robert was a big 12-year-old, a stocky bruiser who won battles with his fists most of the time, and Chris had separated him and Marco more than once. Marco was smaller, but definitely had charisma. He had most of the mice and all of the foxes on his side, and I wasn't sure how I missed all this tension as a kid. It all came to a head in episode 6. Marco was caught hoarding food in the Red Fox village, and it wasn't just food that the other teams had been bringing in either. He had been taking the comfort foods from the canteen the brown mice ran for the village and storing them in his hut. Robert discovered this and took Marco prisoner, demanding that he be placed on trial. The whole village was in an uproar, but Marco agreed to be confined to a central cabin until the council could rule on his trial. Chris was setting the whole trial up as an episode 8 draw for viewers. At the end of episode 8, the council found Marco guilty, and the episode had ended with a lot of shaky camera work and the red foxes storming the podium where Marco was seated. And that was how the show ended. The little bell chimed overhead as I stepped into the tiny place. The store looked like a throwback, sharp-looking rickety shelves that were covered in plastic VHS boxes and thick dust. The shelves held VHS tapes, Betamax, and DVD cases that were arranged neatly amongst the filth and dust. A quick look showed that they were all in alphabetical order, like some ancient library. The shelves fronted onto a glass display case that held murky wonders within. On the counter was a television, an ashtray stacked with old butts, and the greasy store clerk who smiled at me as I approached. "You the one who called about the tape?" he asked, showing a mouth of stained teeth. I searched for months on my own. I had taken to the internet in an attempt to find something, anything that would give me some closure. Wikipedia told me that only 8 episodes were aired, but 12 had been intended. As I dug deeper, I began to see that the show was a mystery all on its own. The list of children that had been in the show were woefully incomplete. Marco and Robert were there, so were Catherine and Charine, and Chris is the host, but none of the other children were even named. No one except Chris Mansworth had gone on to do anything after the show, and his only contribution was his death a few months later. His wiki said that he had committed suicide in his hotel room, and foul play was not suspected. As for the last 4 episodes of Children of Men, there was no mention. So I took to the usual online sleuths, Reddit, 4chan, TV message boards. No one seemed to have the answer. Most people had never even heard of Children of Men, and the ones who had were more interested in my copies than the last 4 episodes. Apparently the episodes were never compiled or released for purchase, and the only means by which the show still existed was on VHS tapes like mine. I had several offers for them. One guy wanted to give me $500 per tape, but I declined. I told him I'd post copies of the tapes here for free if they wanted. And that's how I met Charleston Hammer 462. He was a user on the hometown board of Reddit. He saw my post and posted videos and got in contact with me about the place I was currently in. Heard you were looking for a certain tape. In my line of work, when you're looking for something, you go talk to Reggie. He owns a shop in Burlington, South Carolina called Video Time Capsule. If you need a band episode of a 70s drama or a never-aired documentary from the 60s, you talk to Reggie. I read the messages a few times before responding. Thanks, Charleston. But these episodes aren't just unaired, they're unknown. No one has ever seen them. I don't even know if they exist. And the store you're talking about is over 400 miles away. I figured I'd never hear from him again when I hit send on the message. It took him an hour to respond. What you're after is very rare. I used to watch Children of Men myself when I was younger. It ended so abruptly that it's been an internet mystery since the net was just wells and message boards. I didn't learn about the last 4 episodes, though, until I met Reggie at TVCon. We got to talking about old TV shows, and after a few drinks, he told me that he had the last 4 episodes of Children of Men. Now that perked my interest. Have you seen them? The response took a little longer. I have. It's some pretty different shit. I won't ruin it for you, but if you value the way you remember Children of Men, then don't watch it. There's a reason these episodes never made it to the air. Here's the number to the store. If it's late, call him anyway. Reggie keeps weird hours, and sometimes that store is open 24 hours. He's an eccentric dude. Don't doubt. He has what you're looking for. The number was at the bottom of the message. Yeah, I said, no longer sure about what I was doing. I called you about the complete series of Children of Men. He nodded, reaching under the counter and slapping a plain white case on the counter. All 8 episodes recorded at airing, he said, his eyes studying me. I frowned. I'm after the last 4 episodes. His piggy eyes glinted behind the grease-smeared glasses. There were only 8 episodes that aired. And you told me that you had the other 4 episodes that never aired. He smiled, and it did ghastly things to his porcelain face. Had to be sure. Come to the back. And with that, he disappeared behind a curtain into the back of the store. I walked around, hesitating for a moment as I touched the curtain and followed him. I'd come 400 miles. Might as well go another 5 feet into hell. The phone rang 6 times. I was just about to hang up when someone answered and spoke through a mouthful of food. I didn't understand him, but once he had swallowed whatever he had in his mouth, he tried again. Real time capsule. Where your memories are always on sale. What a tagline. Yeah, I was looking for something specific. The sound of something being stuffed into the speaker's mouth and loud chewing assaulted my ears before he continued. Aren't they all? What you looking for? Clearly, customer service was not their strong suit. Episodes 9 through 12 of Children of Men? I heard something hit the floor, and the speaker cursed loudly. Yeah, you must be mistaken. There are only 8 episodes of Children of Men. Okay, look, I said a little hotly. I was told that you would have things that no one else does. I want to see these episodes. I don't even want to buy them, and I was told that you have them in your possession. Is there any way that I could just $500? The voice returned, and the tone was not one to be bargained with. In cash, before I'll even let you see him. I agreed. Despite the outrageous price, and now I was here in this grungy shop, prepared to go into the back. The back was worse than the front. DVDs and VHS tapes were stacked in teetering piles. The back room was lit by only a few dingy overheads, and I could see an old TV casting its glow from the back. The floor was riddled with trash, and I swear you could hear the mice scampering around to get out of my way. What sort of videos could I find here? Would this place give me anything but heartbreak? It seemed like the setup to 1,000 scary stories, and I suddenly didn't want to see these mysterious artifacts. But like anyone else who comes this close to finding the thing they want, I needed to see them. Reggie was waiting for me by the TV. He had an ancient set that looked very similar to the one my parents owned. On top was a VHS DVD combo player and a set of rabbit ears that stuck out like weather vanes. There was a wooden chair in front of it with a little blue pad in it. Reggie held his hand out. 500, he said. How do I know this is authentic? Look, okay, I could get in a lot of trouble for even owning this. You think guys who was a kid stuff go to prison for a long time? This would put me under the prison for life. If you want to see those episodes, then I need the money. We doing this business here or what? I handed him the money. And he popped the cassette tape in and he walked away. Not joining me? I asked. Not for another $500, kid. I heard the curtain rustle as the show began. Episode 9 gave us a recap of the trial and then the storming of the stage. When the show started, I noticed a distinct lapse in film quality. Whoever was operating the cameras was much shorter than their usual crew, and they seemed barely able to handle the heavy rig. Finally, the camera had Robert in the frame, and he began to fill us in on what had happened in the village. It's been about 3 days since Marco's trial and his escape. Since then, Fox Village has been separated from our village. They took most of the brown mice with them, and now they try to raid us every night for food. Something's going on over there. We heard shouts this morning But at that point, the shouts got louder, and Robert ran off screen as the camera tried to follow him. We came to the edge of the Red Fox village, many of the huts that were once on the verge having been burnt out, making a kind of barricade between them and the rest of the village. Many voices were cheering as something swung from the tree. At first, I thought it was an effigy, a dummy maybe, but then I realized it was Shireen. She swung like a grotesque wind chime in the space between the villages, and Robert shouted for Marco to stop being a coward and come out. Some of the kids were crying, but everyone on the other side cheered and shouted, "Traitor!" or "Faithless!" at the swinging body of Shireen. I sat glued to the TV, unsure if any of this was even real. It was night when the next recording resumed. It seemed that whoever was running the camera wanted us to see a raid. The night vision on the camera showed kids with torches fighting other kids who were leaving their storehouse in a hurry. The kids with torches hacked at them with machetes, blood flying as they connected, and some of them dropped as they were stabbed or hacked to pieces by the blades of other children. The rest of the episodes were mostly uneventful. Lots of shaky cam, lots of crying, and at one point, someone dropped it and didn't pick it up for several minutes. As the episode ended, I was left looking at my own stark face looking back at me. What had I just watched? I mean, there was no way that could be the same show, right? Things had gone very Lord of the Flies in the village. And as the 10th episode started, I wasn't sure what to expect. Episode 10 started without preamble. There was no recap, there was no theme music, and the footage looked unedited. We see a much more professional camera crew and Chris Mansworth trying to bring some order back to the island. They're coming up to the shallows. Chris and about 10 adults coming up in the dark towards the village. Chris was talking about how this had gotten out of hand and how they were going to try to rescue the children. As they came into the seemingly empty village, Chris cupped his hands and began to shout at the empty huts. He told them the game was over and that it was time that they went home. He told them there was a boat that would take them home. Still no response. He moved deeper into the collection of straw huts and fires burning low around them. And that was when they struck. Kids with spears and machetes came screaming out of the darkness, and the cameraman backpedaled furiously as the adults were taken completely by surprise. Blood flew. Legs were sawed off as the pint-sized savages hacked and chopped. Chris Mansworth was buried under a pile of children as he screamed and flailed. As the cameraman tripped and went down, we saw the shadow of children standing over him as the spears came down. The episode ended abruptly. I was speechless. What the hell had happened to them? These were kids that had been doing challenges and making friends. The rivalry between Robert and Marco had always been the most serious part of the show, but now they had devolved into that. The 11th episode was about 10 minutes long. It opened on a stationary camera shot of the same space that they had held the trial. Marco was on his knees before the camera, and he looked bad. His left eye was a puffy mess of bruised tissue. His left ear was a bleeding stump. His nose looked to be cut jaggedly. He was weeping silently, and his tears were thick and bloody. Robert stood behind him. He had always worn a white football jersey in every episode I'd seen him in, but the garment was stained red and brown now. He bled from several places on his chest, and when he raised his machete, it was with obvious pain. This morning, before the sun had risen, this dog attempted to attack our village. He violated the rules of war as agreed upon by he and I. He agreed to a battle between our two villages at dawn, and this snake tried to attack us in the night and lost. Thus his village is forfeit. It's the winner. I sentence him to death. Please, Robert. Chris Mansworth's voice could be heard off screen. The show's over. You can all go home now, back to your parents. It doesn't have to end like this. As Marco cried his terrible tears, Robert looked to Chris off screen and turned back to Marco. The show is over. This is our home now. He brought the machete down. Marco cried out and fell face first to the ground. Robert fell on him, hitting him with the machete again and again. Blood sprayed from the struggling child, and when Robert looked back to the camera, his face was spattered in gore. He reached out and the camera went off abruptly. The last episode was only a few minutes. It started with a shaky cam journey through the jungle. The runner was being pursued. I could hear the footsteps behind him. As the runner got to the shore, he jumped into something and pushed out into the water. The wooden deck of the boat came into view as he drifted out. I could hear oars working in the water. He sat the camera on the seat. As he rowed, the face of children could be seen in the surrounding jungle. And then everything went dark. The tape clicked and the TV went back to static. I left it in the VCR and I stumbled out of the back room. Reggie was sitting behind the counter and looked up at me with something like sympathy. He held something back towards me and I saw it was my money. I shook my head and I stepped away from him. I had bought a ticket, and I had paid the price. You gonna be okay? He asked. Yeah. So, what happened to the kids? They just left them there? Reggie shrugged. Coast Guard picked up Chris Mansworth 2 days later. He was drifting in the ocean. He looked extremely rattled. Wouldn't tell him how he'd gotten out there or where he'd been. When he got back, he gave the tapes to the studio. Next time someone saw him, he was dead. And the kids? The studio never pursued the show. Never sold the aired episodes. Never even tried to air what Chris brought back. They just made the whole thing disappear. Suppose there's an island out there full of kids who went on a TV show and never came back. Parents likely told them they'd been in an accident or something. The thing was hushed up and eventually people forgot. And you'll forget too one day, he added. Though it might help. As I lay in bed now trying to forget the horrible things I saw, I hope that I do forget. But I doubt I ever will. So if you happen to find an island out in the Pacific, maybe one full of locals that just don't look right, turn your boat back out to sea. Because the people there are not friendly. Past the blaring light of the hallway, I could only see her silhouette. "There's a monster in my closet," she said. My wife was more awake than me. She started to get out of bed. "No," my daughter said. "You don't go, Mommy. Daddy's braver." "Peter, you hear that? Apparently you're braver," my wife mumbled as she slid back into the covers. "I am," I said. The girl took after her mother, with the overactive imagination. This wasn't the first time our daughter had woken us up in the middle of the night with abstract fears, and I feared that it wouldn't be the last. As I dug my slippers out from beneath the bed, I convinced myself that with a bit of rational thinking, I could put an end to these 2 a.m. wake-ups. "It's the squiggle again," she whispered, dangling her legs from the bed. The squiggle was just another in a long list of creatures that would hide in my daughter's closet. There were goblins, there were bears, and, after a fumbled explanation of world politics, Osama bin Laden shared the closet space for about a month. That night, it was the squiggle. She kept on looking at the closet door, expecting me to open it like I always did, but I didn't. Instead, I sat down next to her on the bed. "Can you describe the squiggle to me, Annie?" I said. She looked back at the closet, as if she was asking it for permission to speak. "Doesn't feel real," she finally whispered. "Well, Annie, that's because it's like spaghetti, but with eyes, and it's on fire." Her eyes were filled up with tears again. "It doesn't feel real. It's like a drawing that no one should ever draw. It doesn't feel real." "Annie, have you ever considered that the squiggle doesn't feel real because it isn't actually real?" "What does consider mean?" she asked, wiping her tears. "It's when you think about something really hard, and it's when you think about something you thought was true, but you think about it really hard and you realize it's not true." The thoughts of the closet drifted from her face. She was no longer a scared child. She was a young mind trying to make sense of the world. "Do you ever consider things?" "Yeah," I said, "all the time." "And does it help?" "When I was about your age, your grandfather used to take me to the lake every weekend. One time, while we were out swimming, he told me that there was an angry octopus that lived inside of the lake that ate little boys. So I got scared. I refused to get back into the water." "And was there an octopus?" "No. Your grandfather was just playing a trick on me. There was never an octopus in the lake, but I didn't believe that. The octopus felt real to me. And after hearing my grandfather's story, I was sure I could feel the octopus in the water. I was sure he was there." "But then you considered that he wasn't there," my daughter said thoughtfully. There was awe in her voice, as if I had revealed some great cosmic secret to her. "You considered, and you weren't scared anymore." A bit of the summer breeze drifted in through the open window. My daughter no longer seemed scared. I felt like a good dad. Do you want to consider that maybe the squiggle is just a figment of your imagination? What's a figment? It doesn't matter. Just consider that there's no monster in your closet. Okay. She shut her eyes in concentration. For a moment she struggled with her thoughts, but then her eyes opened, and she smiled. Thank you, Daddy, she said. Outside, the sky was a chaotic smattering of stars. Somewhere off in the distance, a police siren crawled into the night. I was the only one looking at the closet. Not scared anymore? I asked. No. I consider the squiggle might not be real, and no, I'm not scared. Great, I said, and got up. Good night, Annie. Good night, Daddy. She pulled her unicorn covers over herself and closed her eyes. I looked at the closet. It was covered with cartoon horse stickers that had fused themselves into the wood. The closet would forever remain covered in ponies. It perplexed me how anyone could be scared of such a harmless piece of furniture. Hey, Annie, I said, eyeing the closet handle. Do you want me to check inside the closet? She sat up in bed, confused. Why? There's nothing in there. Another rush of pride went through my lungs. The talk had gone better than expected. Well, for old time's sake, I said. She laughed at me as if I was ridiculous for suggesting that something might be in the closet. But she sat up in bed to get a better view. I grabbed the handle and prepared to swing the door open in a theatrical fashion, but I couldn't. I was positive there was nothing in the closet. I knew that the squiggle was just a product of my daughter's imagination. I even found the idea of spaghetti with eyes to be a bit funny. Yet somewhere, deep within me, a primal fear bubbled. I was consciously aware that the closet was empty, but there was doubt in my heart. Daddy? She asked. Are you scared? No, I said. I'm not scared. I pulled open the door and defiantly stared into the abyss of the tiny dresses and coats. For a brief moment, my rational mind took control and chastised me for being overly dramatic. But then, in the darkness of the clothes, I saw movement. I saw it. I saw that blasphemous monstrosity, which confounded my entire perception of the universe. I saw that horrid nightmare pried from the depths of God's fever dream. I saw the squiggle. The visage of the corroded flesh stole the blood from my face. Its sickly eyes stared deep into my soul. My knees became weak. I couldn't stand in the same world that the monstrosity existed in. The unyielding pressure of an incoming faint pushed my body off balance. Before the curtains of reality came down, I remember swaying towards the closet. My face became intimately familiar with one of the cartoon horse stickers my daughter had attached to the furniture. With a dull wooden thud, I lost consciousness. I awoke to the sensation of frozen peas pressed against my forehead. The lights were on. I was on the couch in the living room. Next to me sat my wife. One hand on the makeshift ice pack, the other gripped around her phone. Should I call an ambulance? She asked. No. I said, I'm fine. You're shaking. I was. The after-image of the horror was still bouncing around my skull. The unexplainable madness that I had witnessed was still sending twitches through my shivering muscles. I'm fine, I repeated. What happened? My mouth felt like it was full of battery acid. There were no words to explain the ghastly fiend that I had seen hiding in my daughter's closet. I wanted to scream. I wanted to pray. I wanted to beg the heavens for some sort of an explanation to the cruel images that were seared into my mind. I fell, I finally said. I'm fine. Are you sure? Yes. She lifted the frozen peas off my forehead. Oh, it doesn't look like you need stitches. That's good, I said. I wasn't there. I wasn't sitting on my couch being tended to by my wife. I was somewhere else. I was standing stark naked before a cruel world I never knew existed. A horrible blizzard of incomprehensible shapes was freezing my bones. I was a frail worm face to face with the Goliath of the abyss. I was nothing in a world that meant me harm. And yet suddenly, past the fear, past the soul-shattering features of the abomination, something recognizable took hold. A familiar worry grasping my being. I sat up on the couch. "Where's Annie?" "Sleeping," my wife said. "I came as soon as I heard the crash. The blood from your cut scared her for a bit, but she was tucked out enough to fall asleep." I got up and I moved straight towards my daughter's bedroom. My fear of that horrid creature had not passed. With every step towards her room, my jaw clenched tighter and tighter, but my legs carried me regardless. I needed to make sure my child was safe. She was lying in bed, deep in her dreams. The unicorn covers were pulled over her face. The closet was shut. "Are you coming back to bed?" My wife's touch made me flinch. I couldn't keep my eyes off the closet. There was a dark spot where my forehead met the furniture. I'm gonna clean up the blood," I said. "Don't wait up." "Are you sure you're fine?" "Yes," I lied. The damp cloth from the kitchen didn't make a difference. I was too late. My blood had soaked into the cartoon horse sticker. The red splotch would be a permanent feature of my daughter's closet. It would always remind me of what I had seen. I considered whether the creature I had seen could have been a byproduct of lack of sleep, but the thought refused to take hold. The body of the creature had managed to seem both impossible and unavoidably real in the same stroke. I knew that I couldn't sleep unless I convinced myself the horror had never been real to begin with. With my mind turning faint again, I touched the handle of the closet. My vision was starting to blur. A familiar sound of static started to buzz around my ears, but I didn't let go of the closet door. I needed to confront reality. I needed to believe that the squiggle wasn't real. The empty closet did not lighten my heart. It simply reminded me of what I saw. It simply made the memory of that burning bush of flesh and eyes shine brighter. "The squiggle ran away." She looked at me from her unicorn bed. There was a calmness in her voice which suggested the hellspawn that we had both witnessed wasn't a thing worth worrying about. "You saw it? You saw that thing?" She nodded her head. "After you hit your head on the closet, it crawled over you and jumped out of the window." "Crawled over me?" I yelled, louder than I should have. I could hear my wife switch on the night lamp in the bedroom. "Yes," my daughter replied, casually. "The squiggle went over your tummy and out of the window. It's okay. It's not real." The thought of those wet strands of flesh crawling over my body made me feel incurably violated. My abdomen was no longer my own. It belonged to the horrible nightmare. "But you saw it." "Yeah." "And you're not scared?" "No," she said, smiling. "I considered whether the squiggle was real. And now I'm brave. Like you." I wanted to grab her and tell her that she should be scared. I wanted to tell her what she saw, what we both saw, was something that should inspire wails and despair. But her innocent smile made me turn away. Her fragile mind had made peace with the squiggle. I was the only one being haunted. "Good night, Annie," I said, closing her window and locking it. "Good night, Daddy," she replied, descending back into her blanket. My wife was standing in the doorway of the bedroom, concerned. I told her that I couldn't go back to sleep. Told her I needed to be alone. I told her I was going to go watch some television. The screens turned to static of a dead channel. The ashtray is full, the bottle half empty. We live in a universe that means us harm. We live in a godless world where unearthly abominations hide in little girls' closets. Regardless of how much I drink or how hard I try to rationalize, I can't convince myself otherwise. All of the windows in the house are shut and locked, but I can hear the birds starting to sing outside. A new day is starting, and I'm unable to face it. I can't carry on knowing that the thing is out there somewhere, crawling through the grass. I drink more, praying that the liquor will help me forget. I drink more, desperately hoping that I'll be able to convince myself that the abomination was a trick of the eye. I drink more, knowing it won't help. When I first saw it, I thought I simply needed a cup of coffee. I'd been to a wedding the night before. My old school friend Angie was getting hitched, to be honest. I hit the open bar a little too hard, especially when I had plans to finish a story earlier the next day. Though they're rarely read, the Habitsville Gazette articles don't write themselves, and my boss would have my neck if he gets another sorry I'm late email from his least punctual small-town reporter, Sam Singer. That's me. So I went to the Sage Diner. I like the Sage because it's a hidden gem, tucked between a laundromat and tattoo parlor. The coffee machine in my apartment had been broken for a while now, and though I had ordered a new one, it had yet to be delivered. So getting my caffeine fix required an outside excursion. I opened the door with a quaint little jingle and took my usual spot in the back corner, away from the scattered elderly couples having brunch, past the yawning truckers having lunch, and across from the television so I could watch the local news. I hate the local news in Habitsville. Not just because they don't ever report on the strangeness of our little small town, or because digital news is putting print media out of business, but because they're so good. They got this new field reporter, Meg Carlisle, and she puts my work to shame. So quick-witted, well-spoken, all real professional. Nothing like me. Still buzzed on a Sunday morning, trying to wave over a waitress for some coffee before I write my next piece. Meg was on that day, reporting from western Habitsville. Apparently a huge sinkhole had opened up by the post office, and she was standing on the sidewalk, her forehead creased as she motioned to the disaster. The sinkhole has overtaken the eastern corner of the Habitsville post office parking lot now. Citizens are advised to stay clear of the area until government resources can be dispatched and damages can be assessed. Her voice came through, tinny and faint over the clinking of dishes and chatter of the diner. My eyes were glued on the image on the screen. The sinkhole was enormous and quite unusual. In fact, it might have been the first sinkhole we had in Habitsville in decades. I wonder what caused it. Whether it was truly a natural disaster or something more up my alley. But amongst all of this thinking, there was a distraction. Past Meg Carlisle and her gesturing hands, behind the gaping sinkhole full of debris, there was a man on the front sidewalk of the Habitsville post office. It was hard to see his face, but he clearly wasn't part of the police nor cleanup crew. I could just make out his shape. Medium size and build, standing perfectly still, looking in the direction of the news crew. "Cup of joe for you today, Sam?" I jumped slightly as Pam, my favorite waitress at the Sage Diner, spoke behind me. "You know me too well, Pam," I answered, laughing nervously. She smiled and nodded, then looked to the TV. "Can you believe it?" she said. Her grin fell and she shook her head. "Thank goodness no one was hurt." "Yeah," I agreed, looking back to the screen. I could still see him, the shape of the man in the background. "They say nobody's allowed on the premises. Think anybody noticed that guy?" I asked, motioning towards the man. "What guy?" Pam asked, leaning forward and squinting. The man," I answered, pointing this time. "Right over Meg's left shoulder, right in front of the post office, on the other side of the hole. He's even inside the caution tape." Pam furrowed her brow and peered into the screen for a few more seconds, then laughed. "You're a strange one, Singer. Too early in the morning to be playing jokes on me." I opened my mouth to say that wasn't the case, but Pam walked away to take the next table's order. I turned my attention back to the screen, but Meg Carlisle, the sinkhole, and the strange man within the caution tape were gone. Instead, there was a commercial for laundry detergent. Eventually, Pam brought me my coffee, and as the first few sips warmed me, I took out my little red notebook to start piecing together my next story for the paper. Though the caffeine made my head a little less foggy, I had to admit, I was fresh out of ideas. Habitsville had been quiet for about a month. There wasn't much material to work with. I could write about the sinkhole, but with the news covering it 24/7, I doubted my boss would want me to put in my 2 cents. He tended not to trust me with the big stories. I let my eyes drift away from the empty note page in front of me and back to the television. Meg Carlisle had come back on and repeated much of the same facts about the sinkhole that she had shared before. And then it was a commercial from a blood pressure medication. Some picturesque, perfectly gray old man playing with his grandkids at the park, successfully staying alive to do so with the help of this little white pill. I had my coffee cup halfway to my mouth when I saw it. I blinked once, twice, 3 times, but the image wouldn't go away. There on the park bench, behind the old guy and his grandkids, frolicking in the grass, was the man. I mean, it seemed impossible. It was impossible, and yet, there he was. The man on the bench, the man in the sinkhole. He was middle-aged, in a beige windbreaker and navy pants. He had close-cropped hair, sensible shoes, and an ordinary face. He had those big square glasses, the ones from the 80s that reflect so much light you can't see the wearer's eyes. This much I had already been able to gather from seeing him within the caution tape on the live news feeds. But what I hadn't been able to see before was what he was saying. By the position of his head, I could tell that his gaze didn't linger on the children, nor the old man on the blood pressure medication. Instead, he stared directly into the camera. As the voiceover droned on about side effects and asking your doctor is blah 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 right for you, I could see the man's mouth moving, though I couldn't hear his words. His lips twisted silently. I could have sworn the man was saying, "You." My spine prickled once I recognized the word, and a deep sense of dread crept its way into the very marrow of my bones. I should have felt silly. Like I said, the man was average-looking. It was entirely likely that he was merely sharing a passing resemblance to the man in the sinkhole footage. And perhaps my eyes were playing tricks on me. Maybe what I thought was you was actually an attempt by a commercial extra to suppress a sneeze. Realizing I'd been holding my cup halfway to my open mouth for about 45 seconds, I placed the ceramic back onto the saucer and tried to shake myself out of whatever had taken hold of me. Perhaps I was still drunk from the night before. Eventually, Pam came back and refilled my cup. I thanked her, then asked as politely and as normally as I could, "Hey, can we possibly change the channel on the TV?" She raised her eyebrows and rested the coffee pot on her hip. "Sure, hon, if you want." Then she fished into her apron and pulled out an ancient remote, stained with coffee and sticky with decades of maple syrup. I was embarrassed when the hand that accepted the remote shook, but Pam didn't seem to notice that. Just she hadn't noticed the odd specter inside the caution tape. I switched the channels quickly. The TV was one of those old, chunky ones with the antenna protruding from the top, so it didn't pick up much. Eventually, I settled on a sitcom from the early 90s, with some mundane but harmless plot. A teenage girl doesn't like her new stepmom. Perfect. "You're not my real mom," the girl was saying, crossing her arms. I turned back to the page in front of me, the one that hadn't yet been kissed by my pen. There was nothing, absolutely nothing to write about. Whether my head was clear or not, I could try to put together something about the sinkhole. Or maybe my boss wouldn't turn it down if I had it ready Monday morning. Fresh article about fresh news, played off on his desk first thing. "You're not my real mom!" Something wasn't right. That line, the girl had already said it. "You're not my real... You're not real... You're not... You... I looked up. There was the teenager, arms still crossed. And the stepmom, Botoxed forehead just barely creased, standing in the middle of the living room, The girl was saying her line over and over as the TV skipped, and between the glitches of static, as the tape rewound, I could see him. There, sitting on the couch, in a late 90s living room, was the man. My mind told me I was being ridiculous, but the surge of fear that instinctually raced through me told me otherwise. It was the same man. He wasn't partaking in the argument, nor milling about like an extra as the footage continued to skip and the girl's mouth opened and closed. The man stared ahead, directly into the camera, directly at me, sitting in the diner. As the girl's voice repeated itself, so too did the movement of the man's lips. "You," he was mouthing, as the actress's voice echoed the same statement. You. He continued like this, and I continued to watch. The remote felt cold and heavy in my sweating hands. Trembling, I tried to hit the power button and shut the machine off entirely, but it wouldn't work. I pressed it again and again and again, but whether it was stuck due to a lifetime of hash brown grease or something far more sinister, the television would not turn off. I changed the channel, and for a blissful moment, the torturous repetition of that terrible word ceased. I could breathe. It was a game show. One of those trivia ones. A math teacher from Ohio was trying to name a hit song from 2010, but he wasn't coming up with anything. "You can do it," the host said with a plastic grin. The camera cut to the audience, a crowd of smiling, cheering people. I felt my shoulders relax. The pain in my chest lessened. "You can do..." The air stopped dead in my throat. "You can... You... I lifted my gaze. Third row, sixth seat, between a Midwestern family of 4 and an old woman doing a crossword, was the man. His mouth was moving, gray, grainy lips fixating on the same word as the same few frames replayed over and over again. Finally, with a deep pit of dread in my stomach, still hot from my coffee, I did something incredibly odd and immensely disturbing. I raised my shaking hand and slowly pointed a finger towards my chest. "Me?" I asked out loud. At first, nothing happened. Then the man raised his own hand and pointed at the camera. "You," he mouthed again. Then the television changed its own channel. We were back to the local news with Meg Carlisle talking about the sinkhole. The huge, cavernous thing was still in the background, framed by bright yellow tape. And there in the very back was the man, just as I had seen him before. Waiting. It's hard to explain why I went to the sinkhole. I mean, perhaps it was a compulsory need to satiate my own curiosity, or maybe it was just plain masochism. Truthfully, I was a little afraid of what would happen if I didn't show up to that very spot, just outside of the Habitsville post office, where I knew he would be. It was easy to get past the police, since they were used to me creeping around news spots with my little red notebook, and I could see Meg Carlisle holding her microphone, speaking to the camera. I ducked around the side of the post office and approached the sectioned-off area. Up close, the sinkhole was terrifying. It had that great, ancient feeling that humans often live their entire lives without experiencing. The same sensation of staring into the inky abyss of an underwater trench or the center of a black hole sucking up asteroids, stars, entire worlds. But the sight of the sinkhole was nothing compared to seeing the man from the television in the flesh. But disturbingly enough, he wasn't flesh. The man looked exactly the same as he had on the screen. Not just in terms of his beige windbreaker and ambiguous expression, but in the physiological makeup of his body. He was grainy. The edges of him were unclear, constantly moving as I stared. I could see one of the frames of his glasses glitch in and out of existence. I would have said that he was some sort of hologram, but there were no projectors, no hidden devices, and the wood underneath him creaked as he shifted his weight on the bench. We stared at each other for a moment. The TV man and I could feel each of the pretenses. That of the great sinkhole just in the corner of my eye, and of the man. Though he was much smaller than the gaping hole in the earth, they had similar sensations. Powerful gravitational pulls, as though coaxing the minds of mortals to wander a bit closer to the edges. And then the man spoke. Or rather, he mouthed the words. But after hearing him borrow voices to say it so many times, I knew what it was. You, he said silently, pointing a hand towards me. I didn't know what else to do but nod. Then he did something that he had never done before. He pointed away from himself, the tip of his grainy finger directing my eyes towards the very center of the sinkhole. A surge of fear ripped through my body. You want me to... what? To look at the sinkhole? The man kept pointing, his expression difficult to read, his face flat and expressionless. The more I looked, the more I could see there were no signs of maliciousness on his face, no threats. He just simply watched me, pointing. I took a few more steps towards the sinkhole to appease him. Like this? I breathed in sharply as the man stood up. He took a few steps towards me and pointed again, as though trying to make his point clear. I don't want to, I started to say, my feet shuffling only inches closer to the crevasse's edge. I didn't know what he wanted, or whether he wished me harm. I turned my head over to the news crew, to the shape of Meg Carlyle in the distance, but no one seemed to notice me, with a creature of static commanding me. I looked back at the man, his face flat with sparks of white glitching through his cheeks. A gust of wind came, seemingly up from the center of the sinkhole, and it brushed against my skin, warm and earthy like animal's breath. The air tousled the man's hair, even blew open his windbreaker a bit. And then I saw what the TV man was wearing. Underneath the beige windbreaker was a pale blue shirt, carefully pressed and buttoned to the chin. It was tucked into his navy pants, cinched with a belt. It all looked very neat, very official. And there, right there, on the left side pocket was a logo. A blue eagle framed by gold stars and words between thick red and blue lines. U.S. Mail. It wasn't a TV man at all. He was a mailman. I tore my eyes away from him and peered over the edge of the sinkhole towards where he was pointing. My heart was beating fast and hard in my chest, and my head swam with the sheer height of it, but even despite my anxiety, I could see it. There was something white and square down in the pit of the sinkhole. It was smudged with dark, wet dirt, but even so, I could deduce what it was. A package. I looked from the mailman to the package, and then back. Are you serious? I asked, not bothering to hide the disbelief in my voice. The entity said nothing, only continued his steadfast gesture. I thought about leaving, and in fact, I even took a step back away from the sinkhole, but when I did, a new feeling of dread surged through me. The waviness around the man's edges quickened as though he was vibrating. It seemed as though his image stretched outwards, expanding, and though his face didn't change, nor could I see the expression behind his glasses, I could guess what that meant. If I tried to leave, he was going to get angry. Okay, I said, putting my hands up in defeat. Okay, I'm going. The descent into the sinkhole was treacherous and frightening. Gusts of humid wind kept coming up from the dark pit below. My knuckles were white and aching from hanging on to any handholds that I could find as I stumbled farther and farther down. Eventually, I made it down to the white box. I looked up to see the mailman now pointing down at me, still vibrating slightly at the edges, as though he was growing impatient. I picked up the box quickly and half tucked it under my shirt in order to free up my hands for the climb back to the surface. I reached the top, huffing and puffing, dirt caked under my fingernails. I blinked the sweat from my eyes, and I could see the image of the mailman in front of me, his arms finally down, no longer pointing. I retrieved the package from the inside of my shirt and cautiously held it out to him. "Here," I said. He didn't say anything, but I saw his lips move. One last, "You." And then, with a flash like a television turning off, the mailman collapsed in on himself and blinked out of existence. I sat down on the ground. I could still hear the voice of Meg Carlisle somewhere over my shoulder, describing, for at least the 15th time, about how the sinkhole came to be, where it was, what was being done about it. I used my dirt-stained shirt to brush the soil away from the label, to read the name and address that was printed there. Though the street was smudged, I could read the name. Samuel Singer. I opened the box, right there outside the post office. New coffee maker. That wasn't all. Inside, in a brightly colored piece of paper, was a coupon. $5 off my next purchase for late delivery. Do you remember those nightmares from when you were a kid? No more than 7, 8, maybe more? The ones that would jolt you awake, sweating in your sheets. I do. Mine was where I was this investigator, investigating this case where a girl had gone missing. Tracked her down to a family basement, where I discovered a doll that looked exactly like her, inside a coffin, where she was stuffed inside, dead. Then I was locked in the basement in the dark, left to face the doll alone, and the doll would always rise up, the corpse within it cracking and making these moist, fleshy sounds. I would always wake up after that. But I'm not here to talk about her. No, I'm here to talk about something far worse and stranger. I'm here to talk about a woman who lived across the street. A woman who now is haunting my life. I first met her a few years ago. I'd recently moved into the house, which I shared with some roommates, and I'd only been on the street having a walk when she approached me. "You're the new girl," she said, tapping me on the shoulder. Yeah," I replied. "Tiffany Hydrangea, just moved." I turned and pointed at the house, right over there. "I'm Janice. Janice Commonwealth," she introduced. She was a typical old grandma-esque person, with a flower-patterned dress and flowing white hair. "I live in the cottage around the bend, near the lake. Come visit sometime. I'll bake you cookies or something. Think of it as a welcome to the neighborhood gift." "Thank you," I replied. "But you don't have to. I'm sure I can." No, I insist." And so, next week I went over and was treated to some of the best cookies I'd ever tasted. They were soft, sweet like honey, and were studded in a nut I've never been able to really find. And then I came over another week, then another, and another. Very soon, it was more part of my schedule. I'd go over every other week, talk about my life, where I'd worked for a company that had something to do with old relics, and she told me about new ideas for her cookies. And then, she vanished. A month ago, she disappeared. I went over as usual and nobody answered the door, even after I'd knocked 5 or so times. Usually she'd be quick to answer, or she'd yell something. "Miss Commonwealth?" I yelled. No answer. I feared for the worst. I tried the door handle. It shook open, turning, and I pushed it, opening the door. It was odd. She'd never had the door unlocked, ever, even when I was visiting. The first thing I noticed was the scent of tea and cookies. That, at least, was normal, but not anything else. "Hello?" I asked, searching. "Miss Commonwealth?" All I got was silence. I went over to the kitchen. Perhaps she'd been caught up in baking or something, but still. Nothing. The kitchen was empty, void except for cakes of tea laid out on the dining room table, and still baking cookies in the oven. It was as if she'd vanished, just as she was about to answer the door. But then, why had the door been unlocked? I continued my search, all over the house, but still, I didn't find her. Suddenly, just as I reached her bedroom, I heard something. A rustle of leaves outside, and I turned, fast as lightning, towards the window. I saw a blur like an animal moving rapidly, but it didn't look like any animal I'd known. I called the police after that, and I waited for them to arrive. That's when I got the phone call. It was Mrs. Commonwealth, except for some reason my phone displayed her as an unknown caller. That had never happened before. The profile picture was the same, but still, the name itself was unknown caller. Mrs. Commonwealth? I answered. Where are you? Silence. I asked again. Silence. I began to ask again, but before I could, I heard her deep breathing, panting as if she was being hunted. Hello? I'm lost. I don't know where I am. Can you find me? Mrs. Commonwealth, can you describe where you are? I panicked. The static poured in, and I yelped, pushing the phone away from my ear. Walls are so bright. My God, it's coming. The walls, it's like clay. Static over again poured into my ears, and then silence. Hello? I insisted. Mrs. Commonwealth? Then there was the breathing. Her breathing, but it was like she was far away, too far away. And it was as if her voice had been copied 100 times over, then played back. The breathing got louder, 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 until... We're sorry, but this number isn't available. A monotonic computered voice rang out. I looked at the screen. It was showing an error message telling me that the number didn't exist. What the heck? I murmured, tapping several buttons, then calling the number again. It rang, but nobody picked up. I tried again and again, right up until the police finally arrived. I told them everything. She'd vanished, as if she was about to welcome me in, but then disappeared. I told them about the phone call, and they said they'd look into it. In the end, I think they decided she'd gotten lost somewhere somehow, and told me that she'd probably be back. She didn't come back. I waited hours until the sun set and the moon rose, yet nothing. I thought about calling the police and then decided against it. Maybe, I had thought, they were right after all. Maybe she'd come back later. So I returned back to my house, ignored my roommate's questions about where I'd been all day, and willed myself to sleep. Then I woke up. 2 a.m, my phone was ringing, blasting this tune I hadn't heard in years. It was old, and one I vaguely recognized to be from some obscure 80s artist. I rubbed my eyes, then checked in onto my phone. Unknown number, I murmured, just before my eyes focused and saw the profile picture. Mrs. Commonwealth. What the heck? I tapped the answer button, and I was greeted by heavy breathing. It was farther away than last time. It seemed thicker somehow, as if it had been processed through a filter, yet it seemed real still and organic. Mrs. Commonwealth? Hello? I'm sorry, I don't know where I am. Can you find me? The heck? That's what she said before. No, not just what she said before, but exactly what she said before. The inflection, the voice, everything was exactly the same. Was I too confused to answer? And before I could even think of one, she said it again. Hello? I'm sorry, I don't know where I am. Can you find me? Can you tell me what it looks like? I managed to stutter. I'm gonna call the police. Hello? I'm lost. I don't know where I am. Can you find me? The voice repeated. Where are you? I pressed. No answer. Hello? Silence. And then suddenly, I'm outside. Can you let me in? But it was wrong. It just wasn't right. It was like that monotonal voice dictating the error. It was computerized, processed, inorganic. Can you let me in? What do you mean? I continued. I don't... We're sorry. But the number, I swore, throwing the phone across the room, crashing into the window, where it bounced off, landing on my bed. Wait, the window. There was someone outside in the cul-de-sac it viewed over. Someone was trailing long white hair in a flower-decorated dress. I gasped, impossible. It was Mrs. Commonwealth standing, looking away from the house, facing a tree, her face but inches away from it. Something wasn't right about how she looked, though. I went up to the glass to see closer, and suddenly I realized the flowers on her dress were wrong. I distinctly remember her saying how she'd always wished she could have tulips on a dress and how she could never find any, and this woman outside my house had tulips on her dress. But apart from that, she looked almost the same. Suddenly I heard a noise coming from the palms of my hands. The phone had somehow turned on. There was nothing on it but a photo of this hallway, and no matter what I did, it stayed the same. And then came the voice. Can you let me in? It was the exact same as before. Across the street in the cul-de-sac, Mrs. Commonwealth, or whatever was outside, moved its jaw up and down as if it were speaking. It's so cold out here. The rooms, they were so cold too. Cold as clay. The woman outside continued speaking, the voice emanating from my phone. Please let me in. You're not her. Who are you? What's going on? Hello? I'm lost. I don't know where I am. Can you find me? And then the woman outside began to turn around, and before I could see her face, I fainted. I don't know what happened in the hours after that, but the next thing I knew, my roommates were around me, shaking me awake. What? What? Dude, what happened? Said a voice behind me. Huh? I asked, confused. Magnus, what do you mean? Dude, look around you! And I did. What the heck? I was at the dining table. There was a box of cereal in front of me, and there was a bowl filled with milk. No, not milk. Instead, there was a creamy substance. I poked at it with a spoon and found it to be chunky. I suddenly realized what it was. Clay? What the heck? What happened? I demanded, looking back up at my roommates. We found you like this? One of them said. I woke up and I heard a noise in the kitchen, like someone was looking for something. I went out, I found you, except you didn't act like you. I tried to ask you what you were doing, but you didn't explain. Then you got clay from the arts and crafts bucket, and you started mixing it with milk. You poured it in, and then I tried to stop you. I don't remember. I looked around the kitchen. Sure enough, it looked like someone had been there. What happened next? You were able to push me off, so I went to get the others to help. When I got back, you had a bowl filled with clay and milk. You're about to pour cereal into it, so we stopped you. I don't understand, I stammered. What about outside? Did you see her? Mrs. Commonwealth. What are you talking about? The man known as Stephen questioned. I didn't see anything. I got up, I looked around, then retrieved my phone from Andrea, who had it in her hands. I checked the CCTV app. It should view here, around here. What are you doing? I ignored Andrea. The camera didn't show anything. No strange woman. Nothing. I mean, this didn't make sense. I checked the call app. No calls were made. Not even a scam call. But to my further confusion, the internal camera caught me causing a mess in the kitchen and making the food. I don't understand, I muttered. We don't either, Andrea said. Let's go to a doctor. We drove to the hospital, and within minutes, a doctor was checking me out. They scanned me, poked and prodded, but couldn't come up with a better reason than I was sleepwalking. Weirdly, my friend seemed to agree I was sleepwalking. However, the doctor decided I should stay in one of the hospital rooms for the rest of the night, and So I complied. Well, I tried. The doctors were taking me to the observation room when I caught sight of something out of the corner of my eye. No. Someone wearing a flower-covered dress, and I broke free of the doctor's grip and ran over to them. They looked back, revealing the face of Mrs. Commonwealth, and I ran after them. The doctors behind me chased me, but I was faster, and somehow the old lady, or whatever it was faster, and suddenly it was as if they were in another place, a hallway, alone. The lights were bright, the walls clear white and manila. I felt a sinking feeling, then looked down to see clay. The floor was made of wet clay that I was now sinking into. Hello? Mrs. Commonwealth? Hello? I'm lost. I don't know where I am. Can you find me? A voice behind me asked. I turned around to see. No, it wasn't Mrs. Commonwealth. It was something else. I had turned around to see me. My face on the body of Mrs. Commonwealth. It mirrored my face. Every look, every blink, every gasp. Everything here is as cold as clay. The thing stepped closer, and I stepped back, feeling myself sink into the ground as I stepped. I stumbled, and I fell to the ground. Next thing I knew, I was inside the hospital, the normal one, and the doctors were all around me. Apparently, I tried to run, and I suddenly fainted. And so I agreed to be monitored for a week. And for a week, nothing happened. I mulled around, being observed by doctors, no sleepwalking, no illness, no creepy disease. So I was dismissed. Some sort of momentary hysteria, they called it. Nothing to worry about. And for the next month, nothing else happened. The police filed a formal investigation into the whereabouts of Mrs. Janice Commonwealth, but they weren't able to locate her. Nobody was looking for her anyway. I guess that's the price to pay when you're old. This also meant the police gave up after a week or so, and just claimed that she probably decided to vanish on her own. After all, disappearing isn't a crime. It all got worse, though. I thought I was fine. I wasn't. She appeared again outside the house, facing it. She spoke the same words again, just as my phone buzzed to life, the voice projecting all the way into it. I stayed up that entire night watching her stare up at me from across the street, drilling holes into my soul. When the sun set, I felt the urge to sleep. Before I knew it, I was asleep. She wasn't there when I woke up. Then the second night, I couldn't find her. Not at first. It was only after I noticed something odd. She wasn't near the tree. She was closer this time. Just to the end of the sidewalk, meters away from the door. Again, like before, she didn't move. She just stared directly at me until the sun rose. Then I slept. And now, yesterday, she's inside the house. Outside my door. I didn't see her outside. I didn't even consider that she was inside the house until I heard it. Hello? I'm lost. I don't know where I am. Can you find me? I'm not sure what'll happen if she gets in. I'm not sure what happened to her. All I know is that I want it to stop. So if you know anything about what could have happened to Mrs. Commonwealth, I need to know. Hey there kids, it's me, MrCreepyPasta, and it's the end of today's video, or today's episode of the podcast, which means I want to tell you guys thank you so much for watching. And thank you for hitting like and subscribe and bell, and I think it's still subscribe on podcasts. One day I'll look that up. If you guys are listening on your phone, like I think the statistics say like 90% of you are, then on your phone you can also listen on another place. It's an app called Chilling. The Chilling app allows you to listen to stories from me that you can't get here, as well as stories from a whole group of other narrators. A lot of them you've heard before, some of them you've even heard here, like Autumn Ivy. Plus, it allows you to control the background music and background ambiance, which I think is probably one of the coolest features on there. Check out Chilling on Android and iOS now. I want to give a very big thank you to everybody on Patreon, especially Jordan Alexander Sanchez, Stephanie Butler, Brian Arce, Bobby Karman, Tristan Pelton, Chance Burnett, Diana Kraus, Crazy Kid, MrMarcusBlitz, Aika Limchoc, Dirt Diver 030, Robert Schonkwiller, USMC, Matt Bach, Jabbles Raz, Masked Note, Joshua Mullen, Dan Pham, Matthew McNeese, Ben Spates, Jeremy H., Raltizal, PhycoMel, Nana, TheMorrigan, Nick Weaver, Melted Lake, Tali Sue, Sky Mara Ravenswood, William King, Reaper 61167, Darth Miver, Michael Ortiz, Satanic Aries, Isodo Hatred, Nessie, Ronnie Hansen, Parafa Panda, Bardo Hawk 764, Lambda M98, Harley, Billy Morrow, Sashi Suzaku, at Grizzly Olsen Pro, My Body Sounds Like Rice Krispies, Jay, Miss Exandra, Suji Campbell, Stricken, Azarine Fox, Fried Chicken 12, Freddy Krueger, Happy Birthday Jason Willis, Infernal One, Lisa Cottrell, Caspian, Hades Nephew, Tater Chip, Acid System, Prozac and Pancake Appreciation Society, Cryptic Nightmares, Kiri the Sloth, Tommy Green, Fester's Lampshade, Sky Harbor, Nico Kyle, Rafael Rodriguez, The Ginger Bros, Aaron Stormcrow, Daniel Polson, Trey Smiles, and Corey Kenshin. Like I said, I cannot thank you guys enough for being a part of this, and that goes to everybody down there in the description, and everybody who even can just support for $1. Thank you guys, thank you guys, thank you guys. I hope you all have a wonderful holiday season, and sweet dreams.